At the center of this tragic story were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Oliver Holbrook, a charismatic local businessman, Taylor Tanner, a devoted elementary school teacher, and Claire Reeves, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave two of them dead and the third forever changed. Oliver Holbrook was born and raised in Millbrook, the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From an early age, it was clear that Oliver was destined for success. His father, a prominent local attorney, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Oliver excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school football team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Oliver attended an Ivy League university where he studied business and economics. But there was another side to Oliver Holbrook, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Oliver viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Oliver was never satisfied. He craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Oliver began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Oliver entered into relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Holbrook, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Claire, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Oliver know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Taylor Tanner was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Millbrook, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved family doctor, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal shelter. Taylor's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Tanner household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter, and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Taylor into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. It was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider, having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York. Her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. As summer turned to fall in Millbrook, the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns, or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire. Even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver, the two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women, with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping. More than once, Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and icy accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then, it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plan seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower, struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Montague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now surely Oliver would be hers, but as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Montague's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks. She obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Montague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Montague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she didn't recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Claire. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire, Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces. In the quiet, picturesque town of Pine Hill, the gruesome murder of Jennifer Johnson sent shockwaves through the community. What appeared to be a peaceful, close-knit suburban enclave was shattered by a crime of passion and betrayal that revealed the dark underbelly of seemingly idyllic lives. The lives of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson, intertwined in ways that would lead to obsession, deceit, and ultimately, murder. Daniel Garner was a respected architect, known for his charming demeanor and seemingly perfect marriage to Linda, a dedicated school teacher. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, and his wife Jennifer were the Garners' closest friends. The two couples shared more than just neighborhood barbecues and weekend getaways. They also engaged in a consensual wife-swapping arrangement that initially brought excitement and novelty to their lives. However, beneath the surface of this unconventional lifestyle, dangerous emotions were brewing. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer grew into an all-consuming obsession, one that Linda, his wife, was painfully aware of. Jennifer, sensing the intensity of Daniel's feelings, decided to put an end to the arrangement, not realizing the deadly consequences her decision would provoke. Daniel and Linda Garner had been married for 10 years, and from the outside, their marriage appeared to be a model of stability and happiness. Daniel was a successful architect, known for his innovative designs and charismatic personality. Linda, a third-grade teacher, was beloved by her students and respected by her colleagues. They lived in a charming house on Maple Street, surrounded by a well-tended garden that Linda took great pride in. Mark and Jennifer Johnson moved to Pine Hill 5 years ago and quickly became friends with the Garners. Mark, a financial advisor, was outgoing and affable, always the life of the party. Jennifer, with her striking beauty and magnetic personality, was equally popular. The Johnsons' arrival brought a new dynamic to the neighborhood, and their friendship with the Garners blossomed over shared interests and mutual respect. The idea of wife-swapping was first brought up during a dinner party at the Garners' home. Fueled by wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation turned to the topic of open relationships. To everyone's surprise, the concept was met with curiosity rather than shock. Over the next few weeks, the idea was discussed more seriously, with all parties agreeing to boundaries and rules to ensure their primary relationships remained intact. The first encounter was awkward but exciting. Daniel and Jennifer, and Mark and Linda exchanged partners for the night. It was a thrilling yet nerve-wracking experience, but one that left them eager for more. What started as a once-in-a-while experiment soon became a regular part of their lives, adding a spark to both marriages. Initially, the arrangement seemed to work well. Both couples appeared happier and more connected. They maintained their social activities, often hosting joint parties and going on vacations together. Their secret was carefully guarded, discussed only within the confines of their homes or during private gatherings. The novelty of the arrangement brought a sense of exhilaration, and for a while, it seemed like they had found the perfect balance. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to surface, particularly in Daniel's behavior. He started to show an unusual amount of interest in Jennifer, often finding reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed his increasing preoccupation, but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Mark, too, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. Unbeknownst to the others, Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was turning into something deeper and more troubling. He found himself thinking about her constantly, replaying their encounters in his mind and craving more time with her. What had started as a harmless adventure was slowly morphing into an obsession that would have devastating consequences for all involved. Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was no longer just a thrill. It had evolved into an all-consuming obsession. He thought about her incessantly, his mind wandering to their encounters during work meetings and family dinners. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his desire for Jennifer. He started to find ways to be near her, volunteering to help with tasks Mark usually handled, or inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda began to notice the change in her husband. At first, she attributed it to the excitement of their new lifestyle, but soon it became clear that Daniel's interest in Jennifer went beyond their agreement. He became irritable and distant when they weren't with the Johnsons, and his conversations often veered towards Jennifer's likes and dislikes, her quirks and habits. One evening, while cleaning up after a dinner party, Linda confronted Daniel. His reaction was defensive, dismissing her concerns as jealousy. Linda, not wanting to disrupt the delicate balance they had established, let it go but kept a closer eye on him. Her suspicions grew when she found him staring at Jennifer during gatherings, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Jennifer, too, began to sense Daniel's growing obsession. Initially flattered by his attention, she soon found it uncomfortable. His touches became more possessive, his words more intimate than appropriate. She discussed her discomfort with Mark, who brushed it off, believing Daniel was just more expressive in his affections. Mark's nonchalance left Jennifer feeling isolated in her concerns. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin. The couples had planned the getaway to reconnect and enjoy some time away from their routine. However, the trip only served to highlight Daniel's fixation. He monopolized Jennifer's time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle resistance from Daniel. One night, While sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed the line. He spoke about leaving everything behind and starting fresh. Just the two of them. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again. This time he was less dismissive, but still refused to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the extent of Daniel's obsession. She loved her husband, but was increasingly aware that his infatuation with Jennifer could destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic. He started to follow Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings, showing up at her yoga classes, and even appearing at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease turned to fear. She confided in a close friend, who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether. She hoped that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses, and they could all move on from this chapter without causing further harm. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house unannounced. Jennifer was taken aback but let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Daniel confessed his feelings for her, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer, horrified, tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement was never meant to be more than a temporary excitement. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear turned to anger. She realized she needed to put an end to this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. She told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. Over the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart. Linda knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, and while she wanted to support Jennifer, she also felt a twisted loyalty to Daniel. She promised Jennifer she would talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. However, Daniel's obsession only deepened. He started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours, and leaving her messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer, feeling increasingly unsafe, decided to confront him one last time, hoping to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park away from prying eyes. Jennifer reiterated that their arrangement was over and that his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on. Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. He accused her of leading him on and playing with his emotions. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they part ways and return to their respective marriages. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had followed Daniel to the park. She watched from a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the confrontation unfold. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the determination on Jennifer's. Linda knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation turned to anger. Jennifer's refusal to entertain his fantasies felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, holding back tears, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached the two, her voice shaking as she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage, and he turned to her, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, taking advantage of the distraction, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him down. She reassured him that they would find a way to move past this, but inside she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. As the dust settled, the true extent of Daniel's obsession and the depths of Linda's complicity would soon come to light, leading to a tragic and violent conclusion. The confrontation at the park had left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection and Linda's unexpected appearance had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He vacillated between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. Jennifer, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work to find Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank at the sight of him, and she steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing the futility of the conversation, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. His grip was tight and painful, and Jennifer could see the madness in his eyes. She struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The noise attracted the attention of a neighbor, who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Linda, hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet with her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, explained the encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel and make him understand that their relationship was over. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side and betraying him. The argument escalated, and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him and that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed that the only way to resolve the situation was to eliminate the source of his pain. He decided that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. He broke in through a side window and made his way to the bedroom where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her, peaceful and unaware, fueled his rage and desperation. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached her, his mind filled with a chaotic mix of love and hatred. Jennifer awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his grip strong and unyielding. In a fit of rage, he plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her cries. As Jennifer's life slipped away, Daniel stood over her, his mind a haze of conflicting emotions. In the aftermath of the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home, where Linda found him trembling and incoherent. She realized immediately what he had done, and in a moment of twisted loyalty, she decided to help him cover up the crime. The life they had built, the secrets they had kept, were all at stake. Linda knew that if they were to survive, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Linda, driven by a twisted sense of loyalty and self-preservation, quickly took control of the situation. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes and wash off the blood. Her mind raced with the urgency of their predicament. She knew they had to act fast to cover up the crime and protect their secret life. As Daniel stood under the hot shower, the water turning pink around his feet, Linda gathered his clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. She scrubbed the floor where he had walked, making sure to eliminate any trace of blood. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed to create an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then, she drove to a secluded area outside of town. where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying that the fire would consume any remaining evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, although visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. Despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hyper-vigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Jennifer's murder were a blur of tension and deception for the Garners. Linda took on the role of the stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while ensuring their public facade remained intact. She monitored the news for any updates on the investigation, relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. However, Linda knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to create a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested to Daniel that he should appear more distraught over Jennifer's death, to align with the community's grief and to throw off any suspicion. At social gatherings and community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's involvement in his wife's death. Daniel's mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down. He confessed to Linda that he couldn't live with the guilt any longer, that he needed to come clean. Linda, panicked, tried to calm him down. To help maintain their composure, Linda suggested they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery would help Daniel regain some semblance of peace. The isolation provided a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning and public interactions, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Linda's determination to protect their lifestyle and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story straight. Upon returning to Pine Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking and erratic behavior, and whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence came to light, pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi. The Garners' carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell interviewed the Garners separately, noting any discrepancies in their stories. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Mitchell's instincts told her there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his obsession with her. Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on, but his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence and Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found remnants of the burned clothing and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards, despite Linda's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. She knew that their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was to come up with a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them and onto someone else. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies and deceit that had once protected them were now threatening to unravel completely, and the truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. As the evidence against Daniel mounted, Detective Mitchell prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence they had gathered, the phone records, the witness testimonies, and the forensic findings. Daniel, cornered and overwhelmed, began to crack under the pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Daniel, unable to handle the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, finally broke down. He confessed to killing Jennifer, describing his obsession, the confrontation, and the moment he lost control. However, in his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Mitchell, sensing the opportunity to get the full story, had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement, but as Mitchell detailed the evidence in Daniel's account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers, eager to see the conclusion of the tragic tale. Daniel, charged with first-degree murder, and Linda, charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice, both pled guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served, but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife.
Today, we delve into a chilling case from Naples, Florida, in January 2005. A young man's dreams were abruptly ended in a scheme fueled by obsession, envy, and an intense longing for youth. Ethan Wright was a 20-year-old college student thriving in Naples, a locale renowned for its lively retirees, seasonal visitors, and the hidden lives of young individuals who cater to them. Ethan was enthusiastic about coffee and aspired to own his own cafe someday. Known among friends for his deep interest in coffee culture, he loved crafting new blends and perfecting his brewing techniques. Ethan was enrolled at a local community college, focusing on business management to pave the way for his cafe dreams. He worked part-time as a barista at a popular local coffee shop, where his innovative creations were starting to get noticed for their unique flavors, often challenging Maple's preference for traditional brews. Ethan was well regarded by his peers, celebrated for his amiable nature, and his knack for making those around him feel at ease. His engaging personality wasn't just a hit with his friends. He also charmed the older clientele at high-end coffee tasting events, where his skills were in high demand. Ethan was bold and spirited, always on the lookout for new connections and adventures in life, love, and especially in coffee. In the days leading up to his tragic end, Ethan was thrilled about a new opportunity to showcase his latest coffee blend at one of Maple's premier events. His excitement was palpable in every discussion with friends and colleagues. He aimed to carve out a name for himself in the bustling cafe scene and saw this event as a breakthrough. Ethan harbored grand ambitions. He dreamed of traveling the world to explore diverse coffee cultures and someday competing in national barista competitions. He even mused about moving to Seattle to immerse himself in its famed coffee scene. Yet, all his aspirations were halted by a sinister plot that unfolded unnoticed. On the morning of January 15, 2005, Maples was just starting to stir under a clear, cool dawn. Around 8 a.m., Ethan Wright's roommate, Alex Reed, sensed that something was amiss. Ethan hadn't left for his early shift at the local coffee shop, which was out of character. Ethan was usually up with the first light, ready to embrace the day. Alex, concerned, tapped on Ethan's bedroom door, but got no reply. Deciding to check, what he discovered would forever be imprinted in his memory. Ethan lay on his bed, motionless, his skin pale and lifeless. The room, typically filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee or experimental blends, was now unsettlingly silent, marked by a faint, distressing odor. No signs of struggle were evident, no furniture appended or items displaced. It appeared as though Ethan had simply drifted off to sleep and never awakened. Shock rooted Alex to the spot as he stared in disbelief. Panic quickly set in. He scrambled for his phone and dialed 911, his voice breaking as he shakily recounted finding his best friend unresponsive. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed Alex's worst fears. Ethan was dead. Police soon followed, their sirens cutting through the morning quiet, the flashing lights casting eerie shadows inside the modest apartment. The scene felt surreal, the morning's tranquility shattered by the stark reality of death. Alex, overwhelmed by shock, struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. The responding officers gently urged him out to start their inquiry. Later at the police station, he was visibly distraught, unable to fathom the enormity of his loss. Ethan's body was transported to the local medical examiner for an autopsy as the investigation into his enigmatic death commenced. Unbeknownst to all, this was merely the start of a complex, sinister tale. The Naples Police Department responded swiftly to the 911 call from Ethan Wright's apartment on the morning of January 15, 2005. Leading the charge was Detective James McCarthy, a veteran officer known for his thorough investigative skills. The scene at Ethan's apartment was eerily silent. Everything appeared untouched, and Ethan's body lay peacefully, hinting at an unnatural cause of death. As McCarthy and his team entered Ethan's bedroom, the absence of visible violence struck them. No blood, no weapons, no signs of a struggle. Ethan appeared to have simply fallen asleep and not woken up. However, upon closer inspection, Detective McCarthy grew suspicious of more sinister undertone. Ethan's pale complexion and the slight bluish hue around his lips suggested possible poisoning. The team meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail from the neatly kept bed to the half-drunk cup of coffee on the nightstand. They collected potential evidence, including Dr. Cameron immediately requested a full toxicology report to pinpoint the substance responsible for Ethan's sudden demise. The investigation widened as police questioned Alex Reed, Ethan's roommate, who, though still in shock, provided full cooperation. Alex recounted Ethan's recent activities, highlighting his excitement
and Sophia had spent the morning at the restaurant, finalizing preparations for a big dinner service. David had left early, mumbling something about running errands and meeting a friend for coffee. As Sophia drove home, her mind filled with last-minute thoughts about the evening's menu, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's bookstore for a quick chat. Perhaps a cup of tea and a familiar face would soothe her anxious mind. But as she turned onto the quiet street leading to Maggie's shop, her heart froze. There, tucked away behind the bookstore, was David's car. For a moment, Sophia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to convince herself there was an innocent reason for his presence. But deep down, she already knew the truth. With trembling legs, Sophia approached her mother's bookstore. The curtains were mostly drawn, but through a small gap, she could see movement inside. Steeling herself with a deep breath, she quietly unlocked the door with her spare key and pushed it open as silently as she could. The scene that met her eyes would be etched in her mind forever. On a cozy, well-worn leather couch, David and Maggie were locked in an intimate embrace, completely unaware of the world outside. Maggie's usually tidy hair was tousled, and David's shirt was partly unbuttoned. On the small coffee table, 2 half-empty cups of tea stood as silent witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, Sophia felt time stop. Then, as if sensing her presence, David and Maggie looked up, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and something close to defiance. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions and accusation. Sophia's anguished cry shattered the silence, jolting the guilty pair out of their daze. David stumbled to his feet, stammering out half-formed excuses and pleas. Maggie stayed seated, her face drained of color, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sophia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled question after question at them. When they finally spoke, the truth cut like a knife. 6 months. It had started as innocent conversations, then slowly turned into something more. They claimed they never intended for it to go this far. They said they were sorry, but Sophia couldn't bear to hear another word. She fled the bookstore, got into her car, and drove aimlessly for hours, the devastating scene replaying in her mind over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, haunting shadows across the lawn of the house she once thought was her safe haven. As she sat alone in the darkened living room, surrounded by the remnants of her once perfect life, something inside her shattered. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer weight of it all. In that darkness, a cold resolve took shape. Someone had to pay for this betrayal, and Sophia knew exactly who it would be. The events that led to the final confrontation unfolded over the course of several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Sophia, having spent the day drowning in grief and fury, found herself pacing the hallways of her home like a restless spirit. The ticking clock in the living room seemed to taunt her, marking the minutes until everything in her world would change forever. As twilight settled, David returned home. His usual confident stride was replaced with hesitant steps, as though he knew what awaited him. Sophia watched him from the shadows as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now stained by the knowledge of his betrayal. David called out her name, his voice tinged with anxiety. When she finally stepped into view, he visibly recoiled. The woman standing before him was nothing like the vibrant, loving wife he had once known. Sophia's eyes were bloodshot and hollow, her posture stiff with barely suppressed rage. David, his face twisted with guilt and desperation, launched into a flurry of excuses and apologies. He talked about feeling neglected, about the stress of work and the weight of their struggles. He insisted that the affair was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that spiraled out of control. But with every word he spoke, Sophia's anger grew, a storm of rage building within her. Before she knew what she was doing, Sophia found herself walking to David's study. She knew he kept a heavy decorative bookend there, an ornate piece he had picked up from a local shop. In a daze, she grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in her hands. When she returned to the living room, David's eyes widened in fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his voice rising in panic as he promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do anything to save their marriage. But Sophia barely registered his word. All she could see was the image of David and Maggie, locked in that embrace, playing in an endless loop in her mind. What happened next was a blur of movement and chaos. David took a step forward, perhaps intending to stop her, But in the rush of heightened emotions, Sophia swung the heavy decorative bookend in her hand. The sickening thud as it connected with David's shoulder echoed through the room, followed by the sound of shattering glass as a framed photo fell from a nearby shelf. David stumbled backward, a look of shock and pain etched on his face. He clutched his shoulder where the impact had left a deep bruise, his white shirt now smeared with blood from a cut caused by the broken glass. Gasping for breath, David's eyes locked onto Sophia's, silently pleading for the woman he once knew. As the reality of what she had done set in, Sophia dropped the bookend. It hit the floor with a dull thud, snapping her out of her trance. Her fury melted away, replaced by sheer horror and regret. She rushed to David's side, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound she had inflicted. His breathing was labored, his face drained of color. Fighting back tears, Sophia fumbled for her phone and dialed the emergency number, her voice cracking as she gave the dispatcher the address, begging for an ambulance. While she waited for help, Sophia cradled David's head in her lap, murmuring a desperate mix of apologies and pleas for him to stay with her. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, having heard the commotion, began gathering outside. Through the window, Sophia could see their concerned faces morph into expressions of shock as they realized what had happened. She overheard muffled conversations, someone mentioning the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved swiftly to stabilize David. Sophia stood back, numb with disbelief, as they lifted him onto a stretcher and hurried him to the waiting ambulance. The wail of the sirens gradually faded, leaving her standing alone in the silent, tension-filled house, surrounded by the aftermath of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Carla Reyes took charge of the scene, her sharp eyes scanning every detail as officers cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Approaching Sophia, who sat motionless on the stained couch, Detective Reyes spoke in a calm but firm voice, informing Sophia of her rights and asking if she understood what had just occurred. With a voice barely above a whisper, Sophia recounted the day's events, the devastating discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment everything spiraled out of control. Her words were detached, as though she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. As Sophia was led away and handcuffed, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of neighbors peering out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. At the local hospital, David lay in critical condition, his injury far worse than it initially seemed. The blow had caused significant internal damage, and as he underwent surgery after surgery, friends and colleagues gathered in the waiting room, their whispered conversations filled with shock and speculation. Maggie, overcome with guilt and shame, tried to visit David, but was turned away by the hospital staff at his request. She retreated to her apartment above the bookstore, where she isolated herself, refusing to answer calls or see anyone. The weight of what she had caused left her looking years older, her once lively eyes now hollow and filled with sorrow. Detective Reyes dug deeper into the events that led up to that fateful night. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the tangled web of relationships and secrets that had unraveled so violently. The more she learned about the Chambers family's strained history and the affair between David and Maggie, the more complicated the case became. As the investigation moved forward, the town of Seabrook found itself divided. What initially seemed like a straightforward case of assault in a fit of rage was now viewed as a tragic consequence of betrayal and broken trust. Some residents felt sympathy for Sophia's situation, while others condemned her actions as unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Sophia's close friend and fellow chef, Lisa, stepped forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation, Sophia had confided in Lisa about her growing suspicions, sharing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Sophia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to accept the truth, providing valuable insight into her mental state leading up to the incident. Inside the packed courtroom, tension hung in the air as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious district attorney Vincent Harding, portrayed Sophia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the assault was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Sophia's defense attorney, Carla Morales, presented a different narrative. She painted Sophia as a victim of unbearable circumstances, a woman pushed to the edge by a betrayal that shattered her world. Morales emphasized Sophia's impeccable reputation, her dedication to her community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under when she lashed out. In their closing statements, both sides made passionate appeals to the jury. Harding focused on the severity of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jury to consider the extraordinary situation and Sophia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury left to deliberate, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Sophia Reynolds now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had rocked the quiet town of Seabrook. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Sophia Reynolds guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution sought. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Sophia standing quietly beside her attorney. The judge, considering Sophia's unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Sophia was required to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence drew mixed reactions. Some believed it was too lenient given the harm caused, while others felt it was a fair balance of justice and empathy. As Sophia was led away from the courtroom, the gravity of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to settle on her shoulder. David, having recovered from his injuries but forever changed by the experience, moved to a different state to start fresh. He and Sophia divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and rare phone calls. Despite the hurt and pain, there was a fragile sense of forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Maggie retreated from public life entirely. She lived in near isolation, only occasionally visited by a health aide. The burden of her role in the tragedy drained her vitality, leaving her a shadow of her former self. As Seabrook slowly healed and life moved forward, the story of Sophia, David, and Maggie became a sobering reminder of how quickly and irreversibly lives can unravel. It compels us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust we share with loved ones, and to reflect on the lasting consequences of the choices we make.
Today, we delve into the tranquil surroundings of Monterey, California, a locale renowned for its breathtaking coastal views and rich cultural history. The community was shaken to its core when the body of a 21-year-old was discovered under troubling and mysterious circumstances. This is the story of a young groom, a 58-year-old wealthy art collector, and a marriage that ended in tragedy. Jack Thompson was a 21-year-old with a quiet disposition, born and raised in the picturesque town of Carmel by the Sea, just outside Monterey. Jack had recently completed his training as a chef in May 2022, known among his peers as the reserved one who was always experimenting with new recipes. While his friends were advancing in their culinary careers, Jack was still unsure of his path in the culinary world. He dreamed of one day owning his own restaurant, but he was uncertain about how to make his dreams a reality. Jack lived with his mother, Martha Thompson, in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Their financial situation was dire. Martha, a single mother, had struggled to keep them afloat, especially after a series of business failures left them in debt. The weight of their financial troubles bore heavily on Jack, who felt a strong obligation to support his mother. Despite his introverted nature, Jack was deeply compassionate, always willing to help others even as he faced his own challenges. In the week leading up to his untimely death, Jack found himself in an extraordinary situation. He had unexpectedly married Veronica Steele, a 58-year-old renowned art collector, known for her lavish lifestyle and multiple previous marriages. Veronica insisted on an extravagant wedding held at a stunning cliffside estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur. The event was opulent, with luxurious decorations, a gourmet menu, and a custom-made designer gown for Veronica. However, Jack appeared uncomfortable throughout the celebration. He looked anxious and unsure about the drastic turn his life had taken. The sudden announcement of his marriage to the much older Veronica Steele shocked everyone who knew him. Many speculated that his decision was influenced by his mother's financial difficulties, while others feared he might be under undue pressure. Jack's relationship with Veronica was strained not only by their significant age difference, but also by Veronica's controlling personality. She was notorious for her temper tantrums when things didn't go her way, leaving Jack increasingly overwhelmed by her behavior. He confided his worries and fears to his mother, but Martha urged him to stay in the marriage, believing it could secure their financial future. As a result, Jack felt trapped, caught between his mother's expectations and his growing discomfort with his new life. At the time of his death, Jack was still struggling to adjust to his changed circumstance. He had withdrawn from his friends and spent most of his time in the luxurious home he now shared with Veronica. His dream of becoming a successful chef seemed more out of reach than ever. He was a young man who had lost his direction, struggling to imagine a future that felt truly his own. On the morning of August 8, 2022, the peaceful atmosphere of Monterey was shattered by a disturbing discovery. At 8:30 a.m., Doris Miller, a 78-year-old neighbor, was on her regular morning walk when she noticed something strange at the cliffside estate of Veronica Steele Thompson. The curtains were tightly drawn, and the front door was slightly ajar. Doris, who had cherished the tranquility of the neighborhood for over 3 decades, found this unusual, especially since Veronica was known for her meticulous habits and always kept everything in perfect order. Driven by curiosity and concern, Doris decided to investigate. As she approached the house, she called out but received no reply. Hesitantly, she stepped inside and was immediately hit by a strong, acrid odor. It was then that she discovered Jack Thompson lying motionless on the living room floor. His body was slumped over the sofa, surrounded by several empty prescription bottles. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table beside him. Doris stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew Jack and could barely comprehend the scene in front of her. As tears welled up in her eyes, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she gave the address and described the grim scene. When the 911 operator asked her to check for signs of life, Doris hesitated but then cautiously approached Jack. She knelt beside him and gently shook his shoulder, calling his name. There was no response. His skin was pale, his lips faintly blue, and there were no signs of breathing. Doris's mind raced back to the wedding just a week earlier, where Jack had looked so out of place next to the much older Veronica in her extravagant bridal gown. She struggled to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. With tears streaming down her face, Doris stayed on the line with the 911 operator until the police and paramedics arrived. The authorities soon confirmed Jack's death at the scene. Doris, shaken and heartbroken, was escorted outside, where she sat on the curb, staring blankly at the estate where Jack's promising life had met a tragic end. The police arrived at the Steele Thompson residence just before 9 a.m. on August 8, 2022. The investigation was led by Detective Michael Harris, a seasoned detective with the Monterey Police Department, known for his sharp intuition and straightforward approach. Detective Harris wasted no time in examining the scene. Accompanied by Officer Mark Davis, an eager young officer, they entered the home that had now become the center of a tragic mystery. The living room, where Jack's body was discovered, was eerily quiet. The elegant furniture and sophisticated decor stood in stark contrast to the lifeless figure on the floor. Detective Harris immediately noticed the scattered empty pill bottles and the glass of water on the coffee table. He examined the labels, prescriptions for medications like Xanax and OxyContin, drugs commonly associated with overdose cases. The scene was unnervingly orderly. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. The extreme tidiness suggested that whatever had happened wasn't a chaotic, spur-of-the-moment event, but something much more deliberate. Detective Harris instructed Officer Davis to begin photographing the scene, while he called in a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and gather evidence. The medical examiner, Dr. Evelyn Hahn, arrived shortly thereafter to examine the body. She confirmed that Jack had likely died from an overdose, but the amount of drugs present, far above therapeutic levels, indicated that it wasn't accidental. As they dug deeper into the investigation, Detective Harris's attention was drawn to a small but telling detail: a wedding photograph of Jack and Veronica on the mantel. In the photo, Jack's expression was subdued, his eyes downcast, a stark contrast to Veronica's bright, confident smile. This subtle detail suggested that everything was not as harmonious in this newly united household as it appeared. The forensic team meticulously collected the pill bottles, the glass of water, and any other pertinent evidence. They also detected a faint scent of perfume in the air, which Detective Harris recognized as Veronica's signature fragrance, a high-end scent from Chanel No. 5. By the time the initial examination was complete, Detective Harris was increasingly convinced that this case was more than just an overdose. The evidence pointed to foul play, and the investigation was just beginning. As they delved further into Jack Thompson's death, suspicion naturally fell on the most likely suspect, Veronica Steele Thompson, Jack's 58-year-old wife. Veronica was a well-known figure in Monterey, famous for her lavish lifestyle and domineering personality. Coming from a wealthy background, Veronica had been through multiple marriages, each ending in bitterness. Known for her obsession with preserving her youth and her tendency to lash out when things didn't go her way, Veronica's demanding nature had earned her a reputation for perfectionism. When Detective Harris and Officer Davis visited Veronica's home later that day, they found her lounging nonchalantly by the pool, just yards from where her husband had died, casually sipping a mimosa and flipping through the latest issue of Vogue. Despite the grim circumstances, Veronica appeared disturbingly composed. Dressed in a stylish kaftan and oversized sunglasses, she exuded a detached air that immediately caught Detective Harris's attention. Veronica greeted the officers with a superficial smile that didn't reach her eyes. When questioned about the events leading up to Jack's death, she explained that she had gone to bed early the previous night, leaving Jack in the living room to work on some new recipes. She assumed he had fallen asleep on the couch when she didn't find him in their bed the next morning. Upon hearing of his death, her reaction was muted, showing only a mild expression of sorrow, as if she had learned of a distant acquaintance's passing. During the interrogation, Veronica's story remained consistent, but her emotional detachment raised suspicions. She cooperated with the investigators but kept a certain distance, responding with practiced precision. When asked about the medications found at the scene, Veronica mentioned that Jack had been struggling recently and had prescriptions to help with his mental well-being. She claimed to be unaware of any potential for overdose, suggesting that perhaps Jack had taken more pills than intended in a moment of despair. Despite her composed facade, Detective Harris noted several inconsistencies in Veronica's account. For instance, Veronica had claimed that Jack was working on his recipes, yet the TV, which he often used to watch cooking shows for inspiration, was off when Doris Miller found the body. Moreover,
the bed in the master bedroom appeared untouched, suggesting that Veronica may not have gone to bed at all. The more Detective Harris examined her statements, the clearer it became that Veronica was hiding something. However, without concrete evidence, the police couldn't detain her. Veronica's alibi seemed airtight, but her demeanor cast a shadow of doubt. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Harris remained uneasy, suspecting that Veronica, with her elegant and confident exterior, was more deeply involved in Jack's death than she was letting on. With Veronica Steele Thompson still under scrutiny, the focus shifted to a second suspect, Martha Thompson, Jack's mother. Martha, at 49, had faced a lifetime of hardships. Her life was marked by poor choices, each seemingly worse than the last. Overwhelmed by crippling debt, Martha had turned to selling prescription drugs in secret, a fact known to only a few. Detective Harris, aware of Martha's past arrests, considered how her dire financial situation might have driven her to push Jack into his ill-fated marriage with Veronica. The union promised financial salvation, too tempting for Martha to ignore. When brought in for questioning, Martha appeared disheveled and anxious. Dressed in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, she was a stark contrast to Veronica's polished appearance. Martha's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had recently picked up again, and her voice quivered as she answered questions. She admitted to encouraging Jack's marriage to Veronica, describing it as an opportunity too good to pass up. She recalled the wedding at the Grand Big Sur estate, where Jack had looked distinctly uncomfortable amidst the extravagance. Martha insisted she only wanted what was best for her son, that Veronica could provide the financial stability she had failed to achieve herself. However, when the conversation turned to the medications found at the scene, Martha became defensive. She denied any knowledge of the large quantity of pills, claiming that Jack must have obtained them on his own. Yet, Detective Harris wasn't convinced. Martha's financial troubles, her illegal drug activities, and her desperation to secure a better future all pointed to her involvement. During the interrogation, Martha's responses grew increasingly inconsistent. She initially claimed she hadn't seen Jack for days, but later contradicted herself by saying she had visited him the night before his death. Her agitation and conflicting statements only deepened the police's suspicion. Despite her denials, Martha's connection to the drugs and her apparent motive to maintain Jack's marriage positioned her as a key suspect. Detective Harris knew that Martha was resourceful, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to protect herself, even if it meant putting her own son at risk. As the interrogation concluded, they were getting closer to the truth, but there were still missing pieces to the puzzle. With both Veronica Steele Thompson and Martha Thompson under investigation, attention turned to a third suspect, Harold Monroe, Veronica's ex-husband. At 70 years old, Harold was a successful real estate mogul known for his ruthless tactics in both business and personal matters. His latest venture involved launching a series of luxury developments along the California coast, a project that had significantly bolstered his financial standing. Harold's marriage to Veronica had ended bitterly just months before she married Jack, and their divorce had become a hot topic in local social circles. Veronica had walked away with a substantial portion of Harold's wealth, which had deeply humiliated and angered him. Jack's sudden marriage to Veronica, a much younger man she had recently met, felt like a direct insult. Harold's lingering resentment and envy made him a key suspect in the ongoing investigation. Detective Harris and Officer Davis decided to question Harold. When they arrived at his sprawling estate, they found him in his study, surrounded by blueprints and real estate contracts. Harold greeted them with a firm handshake, exuding an air of calm and confidence. Unlike Martha, who had appeared nervous and unsettled, Harold was composed and seemed almost prepared for their questions. During the interrogation, Harold was cooperative but carefully measured in his response. He admitted his frustration over Veronica's remarriage, describing it as a deep betrayal. However, he denied any involvement in Jack's death. Harold explained that he had been focused on his business ventures and had kept minimal contact with Veronica or Jack since the divorce. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Jack's death, Harold provided a strong alibi. He had been attending a real estate gala in San Francisco, with numerous prominent individuals able to vouch for his presence, making it difficult for the police to challenge his alibi. Despite his cooperative demeanor, Detective Harris remained suspicious. Harold's overly composed calm felt almost rehearsed, as if he had anticipated their line of questioning. His recent heated exchange with Veronica, witnessed during a high-profile charity event where Harold had ominously warned her that she would regret their divorce, only deepened their suspicions. Although there wasn't enough evidence to detain Harold, his potential motives of jealousy and revenge kept him firmly in the investigative spotlight. The investigation was far from over, and Detective Harris realized they needed to dig deeper to uncover the full truth. On August 15, 2022, just as the case seemed to be hitting a dead end, a crucial new piece of evidence surfaced. It was a mild, sunny afternoon, with clouds beginning to gather over Monterey. Detective Michael Harris was at the station reviewing the case files when Officer Mark Davis rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. It had arrived anonymously at the station that morning, immediately raising suspicion. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were shocking. A series of text messages between Veronica Steele Thompson and an unidentified contact, dated just days before Jack's death. The messages outlined Veronica's plan to divorce Jack and disinherit him, using her knowledge of Martha Thompson's illegal drug activities as leverage. The messages revealed Veronica's dissatisfaction with Jack's subdued personality and his lackluster efforts in the kitchen as her spouse, along with her growing eagerness to free herself from the marriage. "His cooking is so uninspired," one message read. "His plating skills are worse than a novice's," another harsh text declared. "If that bleep Martha thinks she can control this bleep, she's gravely mistaken. I'll make sure she and that mediocre bleep chef pay." These texts provided deep insight into Veronica's mindset and intentions. It became clear that she was scheming to rid herself of both Jack and Martha. The messages also hinted at the involvement of a third party, a private investigator Veronica had hired to dig up dirt on Martha's involvement in the illegal drug trade. This investigator had uncovered Martha's history of drug trafficking and was feeding Veronica the information she needed to execute her plan. This revelation painted Veronica as a calculating and vindictive individual, determined to achieve her goals by any means necessary. It also raised significant questions about Martha's role in Jack's death. death? Was Martha aware of Veronica's plot and acted out of desperation? Or was she merely an unwitting pawn in Veronica's elaborate scheme? Armed with this compelling evidence, the police ramped up their investigation into both Veronica and Martha. The case gained renewed momentum as it became evident that the truth was more complex than initially thought. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the full story was still unfolding. On August 20th, 2022, as the investigation reached a critical point, Detective Michael Harris received a breakthrough after analyzing the text messages found on the USB drive and cross-referencing them with phone records. It became clear that Martha Thompson, Jack's own mother, was behind the deadly scheme. Driven by desperation and greed, Martha had used her son as a pawn in her plot. The police now had enough evidence to arrest her. Martha Thompson, 49, was a woman who saw life as a relentless struggle, burdened by debt and haunted by poor decisions. Martha viewed Jack's marriage to Veronica as her ticket out of financial ruin. She feared that Jack, who had shown little interest in women before, would leave Veronica, shattering Martha's hopes for a steady stream of money. To ensure that wouldn't happen, Martha had been secretly giving Jack prescription drugs and sexual enhancers to keep him compliant and performing, but her plan went terribly wrong when Jack accidentally overdosed, taking far more than she had intended. The twist came when it was revealed that Veronica, unsatisfied with Jack's lack of enthusiasm as a husband, had been planning to divorce him and cut both him and Martha out of her life. She had discovered Martha's drug dealings and intended to use that information to keep them out of her money. But Martha, desperate to keep the marriage intact, took matters into her own hands on the night of Jack's death. Martha had given him a stronger dose of the drugs, hoping to calm him down. But Jack, distraught over his loveless marriage and fearful of Veronica's harshness, took even more pills on his own, leading to a fatal overdose. Martha hadn't meant to kill her son, but her actions directly caused his death. When the police confronted Martha with the evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was panicked and frantic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. But as Detective Harris laid out the incriminating messages and phone records, Martha's defenses crumbled. She claimed she never intended to kill her son, only to keep him in the marriage until they could secure their financial future. Martha's arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Monterey. Jack's family was devastated by the revelation that his own mother had caused his death. The community, already shaken by the bizarre circumstances of the marriage, now had to come to terms with the tragic reality that greed and desperation had led to such a senseless loss. As Martha was led away in handcuffs, she appeared numb, unable to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. The community, overwhelmed by grief, expressed their sorrow and disbelief, struggling to accept what had happened. The arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in Monterey's history, but the pain and shock would linger for a long time. Martha Thompson's trial began in early December 2022. The courtroom was packed with reporters from outlets like the Monterey Gazette and True Crime Daily, eager to cover the shocking details of the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Christensen, portrayed Martha as a manipulative and desperate woman who had prioritized her financial needs over her son's life. Christensen, known for his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice, argued that Martha's actions were premeditated and driven by greed. He pointed to the text messages, phone records, and Martha's own confession as undeniable proof of her guilt. The defense, led by public defender Carita Vasquez, countered by portraying Martha as a troubled mother who had made a terrible mistake. Vasquez, a seasoned attorney known for her compassion, argued that Martha never intended to kill Jack. She emphasized Martha's financial struggles, her desperation to secure a better future for her family, and the fact that Jack's death was accidental. Vasquez appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider Martha's difficult circumstances and the pressure she was under. Throughout the trial, Jack's family watched in agony. Martha's actions had torn their family apart, and the pain was clear in their tearful expressions. The prosecution's case was strong, but the defense's argument for leniency resonated with some jurors. On December 15, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. Martha Thompson was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The jury believed that while Martha's actions had led to Jack's death, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that she had intended to kill him. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, with Martha showing little reaction, her face pale and expressionless. The judge sentenced Martha to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, given the tragic loss of Jack's life, while others believed it was fair considering Martha's desperate circumstances. For Jack's family, the verdict brought little comfort. They were left to grapple with the reality that their loved one was gone, taken by the very person who was supposed to protect him. The town of Monterey, too, was left to process the disturbing events that had unfolded in their midst, a stark reminder of how greed and desperation can lead to unthinkable actions. In the months following Martha Thompson's sentencing, the impact of the case continued to resonate deeply within the Monterey community. The trial had left a lasting mark on everyone involved, from the Thompson family to local residents. Martha Thompson was sent to the California State Prison Complex in Sacramento, a high-security facility located near the capital. In prison, Martha faced a challenging environment. Her case had received significant media attention, and she was often the subject of gossip and judgment from fellow inmates. The prison system offered her limited opportunities for rehabilitation and support, leaving her to reflect on the tragic consequences of her actions. Martha spent her time participating in prison programs aimed at addressing substance abuse and mental health issues, hoping to find some sense of redemption and prepare for her eventual release. Despite the turmoil, life in Monterey gradually returned to normal. The town held a memorial for Jack at a local park, attended by friends, family, and residents who wished to honor his memory. The event featured live music and speeches celebrating Jack's life and dreams. It was a somber reminder of the young man whose life was cut short, and it offered the community a chance to come together and support one another. As for the media coverage of the case, it eventually faded, making way for new stories and developments. However, the impact of Jack's death and the subsequent trial continued to serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of desperation and greed, affecting everyone who had been touched by the tragic events of August 2022. At the heart of the story are 3 lives destined to intertwine. Daniel, a 22-year-old photographer whose charm is both captivating and dangerous. Eleanor Bennett, an architect longing for a deeper connection. And Clara Matthews, a recent widow striving to regain her confidence. Their intertwined fates lead to an unexpected act of violence that reshapes their peaceful coastal town, forcing everyone to reevaluate their understanding of their neighbors. Daniel, at 22, carried himself with a maturity beyond his years. His striking 6-foot frame and easy smile turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that made him stand out. Daniel had a charisma that made everyone feel uniquely seen. Raised by a retired Army officer, Daniel learned independence early, picking up the discipline and observational skills that made him an exceptional photographer. He could capture moments that others might miss, which quickly made him popular in Willowbrook, where he had set up his own small photography studio. After completing high school, Daniel moved to Willowbrook, seeking both inspiration and independence. His father's old friend offered him a place to stay, giving him the freedom to explore his artistic ambitions without the pressure of immediate success. The locals quickly took notice of the new arrival. People of all ages found reasons to interact with him, drawn to his engaging personality and infectious enthusiasm. It was his neighbors, however, who would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Living on one side was Eleanor Bennett, whose life seemed perfect from the outside: successful career, beautiful home, and a respected husband. On the other side was Clara Matthews, a woman in her mid-40s, trying to rebuild her life after a devastating loss. Daniel's first significant encounter in Willowbrook occurred on a sunny morning, as he was capturing shots of the town's picturesque community garden. Eleanor Bennett approached, offering him a cup of freshly brewed coffee as a welcoming gesture. Their connection was instant, marking the beginning of a transformative journey for both. Eleanor appeared to lead an enviable life, a successful architect, a stunning home, and admiration from her peers. Yet, behind the polished exterior, her life was far from perfect. Married to Martin, a real estate developer whose career often kept him away, Eleanor felt their emotional connection fading after 15 years of marriage. Once full of dreams and creative energy, particularly in her writing,
Eleanor now found her passion sidelined, her unfinished manuscripts gathering dust as her husband's career took precedence. The moment Eleanor met Daniel, an old spark was reignited. His fresh outlook and genuine interest in her stories rekindled her spirit. She found herself gravitating toward his studio whenever she could, her days brightened by each interaction. What began as casual conversations about art and architecture soon delved deeper. Daniel's enthusiasm for her writing reignited Eleanor's long-dormant passion, leading her back to the manuscripts that had once been her creative refuge. One evening, as Martin was tied up with yet another late meeting, Eleanor invited Daniel over to share some of her old manuscripts. In the quiet of her home office, surrounded by stacks of paper filled with the stories of her abandoned dreams, a palpable shift occurred. Daniel's hand brushed against hers as they flipped through the pages, sending a jolt of emotion through Eleanor. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Daniel's gaze was curious, stirring feelings that had long been buried. Years of emotional neglect had led to this moment, a desperate yearning for genuine connection. Eleanor leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was transformative. As she pulled back, the intensity of her emotions left her breathless and conflicted, but the spark Daniel had ignited was too powerful to ignore. Clara Matthews, at 45, was forging a new path. After the unexpected death of her husband, she had summoned the courage to reshape her solitary life. The loss had become final just a few months before Daniel moved in next door, leaving Clara emotionally vulnerable. Once vibrant and confident, prolonged grief had eroded her self-esteem. She doubted even the simplest decisions, from what to wear to how to manage her yoga studio. The tragedy had strained her finances and spirit, forcing her to move from the grandeur of her former home to a modest cottage in Willowbrook. Clara's initial meeting with Daniel took place on a blustery afternoon as she struggled with groceries outside her house. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped in to help, his warm smile giving her a sense of visibility she hadn't felt in years. As they put away the groceries, Clara found herself sharing details of her recent hardships, exchange stories, and share laughter that felt both invigorating and forbidden. The bustling setting offered the perfect camouflage, enabling them to merge with other patrons without attracting notice. However, the happiness these moments brought her was tinged with guilt. Sophie, ever perceptive to the moods around her, started sensing that something was amiss. Though she couldn't pinpoint what it was, a sense of disquiet troubled her. Isabel's demeanor had shifted, her smile seemed contrived, and she often seemed preoccupied during family meals. Occasionally, Isabel would excuse herself to answer phone calls, returning with an anxious expression. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was concealing something, yet she lacked the experience in adult relationships to address it. Meanwhile, Michael remained oblivious to the mounting tension within his family. He stayed committed to his work, convinced that his provision was vital for their happiness. He often returned home drained, seeking comfort in the regularity of household life. His conversations with Isabel had shortened to concise and functional exchanges, which he attributed to her job stress rather than any underlying troubles. Michael frequently attempted to initiate discussions about household projects or future endeavors, but Isabel's aloof and distracted replies only added to his growing sense of frustration and bewilderment. They crafted detailed schemes to dodge any suspicions. Isabel often claimed she had late shifts at the police department or needed to stay for overtime, while Ethan would explain he was prepping for exams or putting in extra hours at the restaurant. Each meeting, veiled in secrecy, not only thrilled them but also intensified Isabel's internal struggle. She was aware she was straying from her commitments, yet the emotional bond with Ethan was overwhelmingly compelling. He made her feel cherished, valuable, and acknowledged, sensations that had become scarce in her life with Michael. One afternoon, while strolling through Portland's Forest Park, Isabel stopped on a hidden path to catch her breath. The air was brisk and the scent of the forest enveloped them. Ethan, vibrant and full of life, enthusiastically shared a tale from his youth. Listening to him, Isabel felt a wave of affection wash over her, shadowed by the stark reality of their situation. She pondered whether this new connection was worth the risks. Despite knowing the precariousness of their liaison, the enchantment of their shared moments was too tempting to forsake. Sophie's doubts kept mounting. She observed her mother intently, trying to decipher the shifts in her demeanor. The connection they once cherished now seemed compromised, and Sophie contemplated whether to address her concerns with Isabel. She thought about broaching the subject several times, but the fear of unsettling revelations deterred her. She hesitated to distress her mother, especially if her suspicions proved baseless. Michael remained blissfully unaware, immersing himself in his work and home responsibilities. Always the guardian and provider, The notion that his wife might be discontented or concealing something never entered his thoughts. For him, life appeared normal. Although he recognized an emotional distance, he dismissed it as a temporary phase. One afternoon, Sophie returned home early from classes, eager to surprise her mother with her favorite dish. Entering the house, she was met with an eerie quietness. The typical sounds of their family life were missing. No laughter, no sounds of television. After calling out for Isabel and receiving no reply, Sophie felt compelled to check her mother's bedroom. What she discovered there devastated her. Isabel's phone lay on the bed, its screen illuminated, displaying a sequence of text messages that were clearly meant to be private. Sophie's pulse raced as she picked up the phone, her hands shaking with both dread and resolve. She scrolled through the messages, each one confirming her gravest fears. The exchanges between Isabel and Ethan were rife with flirtation, yearning, and plans for future rendezvous. There was evident an emotional affair was underway. The realization made Sophie's heart plummet. Betrayal struck her profoundly, leaving her breathless. The thought that her mother, the woman she had revered, could engage in such deceit was unfathomable. A whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion, surged through her, overwhelming her senses and clouding her judgment. Sophie dropped the phone onto the bed, her mind swirling with turmoil. She felt shattered and betrayed, unable to reconcile the loving mother she had always known with the woman who had been sneaking around behind her back. Her anger surged as she realized her own boyfriend, Ethan, had been part of this betrayal. How could he do this to her? The man she trusted was now involved in her mother's infidelity. Later that evening, when Ethan came over to see Sophie, she didn't hesitate. They were in the living room, the same space where they had shared countless laughs and quiet moments. Now it felt like a battlefield. "Ethan," she said, her voice cold and firm, "we need to talk." Ethan looked confused. "What's wrong, Sophie? You seem upset." "Upset? That's an understatement. I found something today that changes everything." "What do you mean?" His face shifted to concern, but Sophie noticed a flicker of guilt. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I found texts on my mom's phone, texts between you and her. You both knew exactly." While helping Eleanor carry groceries, he narrowly escaped being seen by Clara. He ducked behind a car, pretending to retrieve a dropped item, his heart racing with the near miss. Each close call highlighted the precarious nature of his secret life, leaving him shaken by how easily everything could fall apart. As Eleanor and Clara grew more attached, they began to demand more of Daniel's time and attention. Eleanor, revitalized by her rediscovered passion for writing, started discussing the possibility of leaving her husband. She envisioned a future with Daniel, filled with love and creative collaborations, and painted this dream vividly during their meetings. These conversations left Daniel both excited and terrified, unsure of how to respond to such intense declarations, especially given their age differences. Clara, more cautious about rushing into a new relationship, subtly brought Daniel closer into her life. She introduced him to her friends as the thoughtful young neighbor, but their affectionate exchanges and knowing glances revealed much more. She even hinted at holiday plans, suggesting that Daniel might meet her family during the festive season. The increasing expectations from both women compounded the complexity of Daniel's already precarious situation. He found himself trapped in conflicting commitments, agreeing to holiday engagements with both Eleanor and Clara, fully aware that he would inevitably disappoint one or both of them. As the pressure mounted, the toll on Daniel became evident. He lost weight, endured sleepless nights filled with anxiety, and developed a habit of nervously checking his phone and looking over his shoulder. He knew he needed to end one of the relationships, but was paralyzed by the thought of causing pain to either woman. Unbeknownst to him, his erratic behavior did not go unnoticed. Both Eleanor and Clara, initially blinded by their emotions, began to sense that something was wrong. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the fragile balance Daniel had struggled to maintain. The carefully constructed facade Daniel had upheld unraveled dramatically on a crisp autumn evening at Willowbrook's annual festival. With the town square bustling with festivities, Daniel hesitated about attending, knowing that both Eleanor and Clara would be there. Ultimately, he decided that not showing up would arouse more suspicion than being present. As he mingled among the townspeople, he felt as though he were navigating a minefield, exchanging pleasantries while anxiously scanning the crowd for signs of Eleanor or Clara. Just as he began to relax, thinking he might avoid any drama, fate intervened. Eleanor, who was assisting at the bookstall, caught sight of Daniel and beckoned him over with a bright smile. As he approached, hesitantly, He noticed Clara at a nearby booth, arranging items for an art auction. Time seemed to slow as Daniel watched both women, unaware of each other's significance in his life, drawing closer to an unavoidable confrontation. Eleanor reached him first, her embrace lingering longer than a simple neighborly gesture. As she stepped back, her eyes glowing with affection, Clara joined them. Daniel's heart sank as he saw the puzzled and slowly dawning realization on their faces. A tense silence enveloped the trio, broken only when Eleanor, ever the gracious architect, extended her hand to Clara. Introducing herself, Clara responded in kind, her gaze shifting between Daniel and Eleanor, noticing the too familiar touch that lingered on Daniel's arm. The ensuing conversation became an intricate dance of innuendo and subtle implication. Both women, drawing on their instincts and the hints they had previously overlooked, began to piece together the reality of their shared connection with Daniel. Caught in the middle, Daniel was paralyzed, unable to offer any defense. His silence only deepened the growing suspicions of both women, sealing the fate of his double life. The tension reached its breaking point when Eleanor, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, pointed out a distinctive manuscript she had written specifically for Daniel, a story he had carelessly left behind. In that moment, the full extent of Daniel's deceit was exposed to both women. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears welling up, while Clara's expression hardened into one of icy indignation. Without a word, they both turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone, the weight of his actions crashing down around him. The repercussions were swift and brutal. As Eleanor and Clara departed in opposite directions, whispers spread among the festival goers. Onlookers who had witnessed their charged confrontation began to speculate, and soon rumors rippled through Willowbrook. Daniel, reeling from the sudden exposure of his deceit, fled the event. That night, he paced restlessly, alternating between frantic attempts to contact both women To Ethan's grieving family.
Tried to portray Isabella Ruiz as a frail old woman who could not possibly have orchestrated such a crime. Randall painted Lina Castillo as the true mastermind, claiming that Isabella had been manipulated into covering up for her daughter-in-law. However, Isabella's stern demeanor on the stand did little to win the jury's sympathy, and they were clearly disturbed by the sordid details of the case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Isabella Ruiz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lina Castillo, though charged as an accessory to murder, received a lighter sentence of 25 years after cooperating with investigators. The verdict brought some relief to Victor's family, but the damage left behind by the shocking betrayal would never fully heal. Many felt that justice had been served, but Victor's tragic death and the circumstances surrounding it left a dark cloud over the Ruiz family for years to come. After the trial, life changed drastically for everyone involved. Isabella Ruiz, the mother convicted of murdering her son, was sent to a state prison in California. Despite her sharp wit and strong personality, life behind bars proved challenging. Isabella tried to maintain her dignity, but the isolation and stigma of her crime weighed heavily on her. In prison, she was often the target of gossip and disdain from other inmates. Over the years, Isabella's health began to decline, and in 2021 she contracted COVID-19 during a surge in cases. Despite efforts to treat her, she passed away alone in a prison hospital. News of her death made headlines, with some former friends and family expressing mixed feelings about her fate. Lina Castillo, Victor's widow, faced a different kind of consequence after her reduced sentence of 25 years. She served her time in a women's correctional facility, often reminiscing about her life before the murder. During her incarceration, she sought therapy to deal with her feelings of guilt and confusion about her relationships. Lina maintained her innocence regarding the actual murder but acknowledged her role in the events that unfolded. Amy Liu, the young yoga instructor who had become entangled in the scandal, also faced her own struggles. Though Amy was never charged with any crime, the fallout from the trial affected her reputation. She continued to work at the resort for a few years after the events, but the whispers of the affair haunted her. In search of a fresh start, Amy eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where she enrolled in college.
Clara joined them. Daniel's heart sank as he saw the puzzled and slowly dawning realization on their faces. A tense silence enveloped the trio, broken only when Eleanor, ever the gracious architect, extended her hand to Clara. Introducing herself, Clara responded in kind, her gaze shifting between Daniel and Eleanor, noticing the too familiar touch that lingered on Daniel's arm. The ensuing conversation became an intricate dance of innuendo and subtle implication. Both women, drawing on their instincts and the hints they had previously overlooked, began to piece together the reality of their shared connection with Daniel. Caught in the middle, Daniel was paralyzed, unable to offer any defense. His silence only deepened the growing suspicions of both women, sealing the fate of his double life. The tension reached its breaking point when Eleanor, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, pointed out a distinctive manuscript she had written specifically for Daniel, a story he had carelessly left behind. In that moment, the full extent of Daniel's deceit was exposed to both women. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears
He grappled not only with the public scandal of his wife's betrayal, but also the shock of her drastic actions. He withdrew from his public life, taking a leave of absence from his real estate business. The inquiry also highlighted Eleanor's significant emotional turmoil leading up to the incident. Neighbors and acquaintances, who had previously been hesitant to get involved, came forward with observations of her increasingly unstable behavior and mental distress. These accounts became crucial in shaping her legal defense. Clara Matthews's relatives, shocked and grief-stricken, traveled from afar to cope with their loss. The investigation also scrutinized the firearm involved. Legally registered to Martin, the gun had been carelessly stored, raising legal questions about his responsibility in the tragedy, further complicating an already intricate legal case. The trial of Eleanor Bennett began 6 months after the incident. Prosecutors portrayed her as a calculating murderer, driven by jealousy, citing her premeditated retrieval of the firearm and her deteriorating mental state as evidence of her intent. In contrast, the defense argued that Eleanor was a victim of her circumstances, pushed to the brink by emotional betrayal and overwhelming stress. They called upon experts to testify about how prolonged emotional distress could impair judgment. Daniel's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. His detailed account of the relationships and events leading up to the shooting provided essential context, though his time on the stand was visibly distressing for everyone involved. After extensive testimonies and careful deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Eleanor was found guilty of second-degree murder, a verdict less severe than what the prosecution had sought. The judge, taking into account the unique circumstances and Eleanor's previously clean record, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 12 years. In the years that followed, the residents of Willowbrook struggled to recover from the upheaval. The community, once a symbol of peace and neighborly unity, now bore the scars of the tragedy. The events of that chilling November day remained a somber reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic neighborhoods, deep-seated emotions and turmoil can lead to catastrophic outcomes. In this episode, we explore the case of a newlywed husband who disappeared on his honeymoon. The shocking truth behind his disappearance revealed a web of deception, secret affairs, and ultimately murder. Victor Ruiz was a 45-year-old renowned surgeon living in Santa Cruz, California, known for his dedication to his career and sharp mind. He had built a prestigious reputation in the medical field. Despite his accomplishments, Victor had spent most of his life under the firm control of his mother, Isabella Ruiz. After years of bachelorhood, Victor's life took an unexpected turn when he met Lena Castillo, a 32-year-old fitness trainer from Aspen, Colorado. Victor and Lena met at a high-end gym in Los Angeles, where she worked as a personal trainer and he was a client. Lena's warm smile and energetic personality drew him in, and they quickly struck up a conversation that extended far beyond a typical workout session. Her positive attitude and passion for fitness intrigued him, and soon they were exchanging stories over coffee. What began as casual conversations turned into a deep connection. Over the next few months, their relationship flourished. Victor was charmed by Lena's lively spirit, while Lena admired Victor's calmness and stability. They spent their weekends hiking along the scenic coast of Santa Cruz and exploring local art galleries. Lena even managed to win over Victor's strong-willed mother, Isabella, who surprisingly approved of their relationship despite her usual controlling nature. However, their relationship was far from simple. Lena's need for attention from Victor was obvious, but so was her unusual closeness to Isabella. Friends often remarked on how much time Lena spent with Victor's mother, sometimes giving her more attention than Victor himself. This raised eyebrows, with people wondering if Lena was trying to win over Isabella or if there was something more beneath the surface. Lena often invited Isabella to join them on outings, and the two shared private jokes that occasionally left Victor feeling uneasy. Despite these odd dynamics, Victor believed he had finally found happiness. He proposed to Lena in the spring of 2013, and they swiftly planned a wedding, eager to start their lives together. The couple married just weeks before their honeymoon on Catalina Island, California, where they hoped to unwind and celebrate their new life. But just days into the honeymoon, tragedy struck. Victor's vision of a perfect marriage and a peaceful escape by the ocean came crashing down. He mysteriously vanished from the resort one night, and it wouldn't be long before his body was discovered. For a man who had spent his life in control of his destiny, the final moments of Victor Ruiz's life would be anything but. On June 9, 2013, the sun rose over Catalina Island, a favorite honeymoon destination known for its quiet beaches and tranquil atmosphere. As the day began, Lena Castillo awoke in their hotel suite at the seaside resort, eager to start another day of relaxation with her new husband, Victor. But when she turned to the other side of the bed, she realized he was gone. At first, Lena thought nothing of it. She assumed Victor had gone for an early morning walk or headed to the resort cafe for breakfast. However, as the hours passed with no sign of him, her concerns started to grow. After searching the resort and asking staff if anyone had seen him, Lena finally approached the front desk to report Victor missing. The staff immediately contacted the local authorities, and officers from the Catalina Island Police arrived at the resort around 10:30 a.m. Lena described Victor as a responsible man who had no history of wandering off or making sudden changes to plans. She was certain something had gone wrong. The police began their search by combing through the resort and nearby beaches, trails, and other surrounding areas. As the hours turned into days, their efforts continued, but there was no trace of Victor. By June 12th, the island's mood had shifted from one of relaxation to tension. The search intensified as both the police and local community grew increasingly worried, and Lena's worry turned into despair. Then, on the morning of June 14th, a disturbing discovery was made. A local photographer named Frank Baxter came across the grisly scene while walking along a secluded beach around 6:30 a.m.
Hoping to capture the early light. The area was far from the bustling parts of the island frequented by tourists. As Frank neared the shoreline, something in the water caught his eye. At first, he thought it was debris or a large object tangled in the seaweed, but as he got closer, the truth became clear. It was a body. Horrified, Frank quickly dialed 911, his hands shaking as he described what he had found to the operator. Within minutes, the police were on the scene, sealing off the area from onlookers and tourists. Victor Ruiz's body was found face down in the shallow water, his clothes soaked through, with no immediate signs of struggle. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident, possibly a drowning. However, as the investigators examined the scene, they noticed something was off. Faint bruises marked Victor's neck, barely visible but suspicious. His body was bloated, indicating that he had been in the water for several hours, but his shoes remained on, which struck investigators as odd. People don't typically go swimming fully dressed. Victor's body was sent to the county morgue for a detailed examination, but by that time, it was clear this was no ordinary drowning. Something far more sinister had taken place on this quiet island retreat. When the Catalina Island Police Department arrived at the scene of Victor Ruiz's body on June 14, 2013, it was evident to Detective Angela Martinez, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, that this wouldn't be an easy case. While the initial call hinted at a possible accidental drowning, the scene told a much different story. The area where Victor was found was remote, far from the main tourist spots like Avalon Beach, where honeymooners and families usually gathered. The sand around his body was undisturbed, and there were no signs of a struggle or footprints leading to or from the water. Yet, Victor's body was fully dressed, including his shoes, which struck the investigators as strange. People don't typically go swimming with their shoes on. Detective Martinez crouched next to the body, noticing faint bruises around Victor's neck. They were subtle, almost concealed by the salt water that had soaked his skin, but enough to raise suspicion. Something about the scene seemed staged. Nearby, Officer Jake Reynolds, a young officer new to the department, worked alongside Martinez, carefully documenting the area with photographs and notes. An autopsy was quickly arranged, but the early signs all pointed to foul play. The body's condition, bloated from hours in the water, made it difficult to identify any obvious trauma. However, the bruising, along with Victor's fully dressed state, left little doubt in Detective Martinez's mind that this was no accident. The beach remained eerily silent that morning as the investigation team worked methodically. They set up perimeter tape and combed the shoreline for clues, searching for anything out of place, whether it was clothing, footprints, or personal belongings that could offer clues. Their tools included metal detectors, forensic kits, and even drones to scan the surrounding area from above. Detective Martinez took charge, directing her team to treat the case as a potential homicide. Meanwhile, officers back at the resort questioned staff and guests, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything strange the night before. Hotel security footage was also reviewed to piece together Victor's final movements. As the investigation progressed, it became more and more clear that Victor hadn't simply wandered off for a midnight swim. He had been drugged, dragged to the water, and left to drown, the ocean used as a cover-up for a much darker crime. The first person the police turned to was Lena Castillo, Victor's wife of just a few weeks. Lena, 32, was from Aspen, Colorado, and had met Victor less than a year before their whirlwind wedding. Before marrying Victor, Lena had worked as a fitness trainer at a luxury gym in Los Angeles. On the surface, she seemed like a cheerful, outgoing woman with a passion for health and wellness, but those who knew her well hinted at a more complex side. manipulative, secretive, and always calculated. On the morning of June 14, 2013, just hours after Victor's body was found, Lena was brought in for question. Detectives described her demeanor as calm but distant. She wore a large sun hat and sunglasses, refusing to remove them even during the interview. Lena explained that she had woken up that morning to find her husband missing. Initially, she assumed he had gone for an early morning swim, as he had done a few times since they arrived at the Catalina Island resort. But when the hours went by and Victor didn't return, she became worried and called the police. During the interrogation, Lena's story was straightforward, but her behavior raised eyebrows. She spoke calmly, almost too calmly, about her missing husband as if talking about a stranger. When detectives asked her about their relationship, she described Victor as a good man but was vague when questioned about their intimacy during the honeymoon. Detective Angela Martinez, who led the questioning, noticed Lena's lack of emotion. She wasn't behaving like someone who had just lost her husband, Martinez later noted. There was no real sadness, no tears, just a cold detachment that didn't sit right. As the police dug deeper into Lena's background, more troubling details came to light. She had a history of financial issues, with several maxed-out credit cards and unpaid debts. Investigators also discovered that Lena had formed an unusually close bond with Victor's mother, Isabella Ruiz, who had surprisingly joined them on their honeymoon, a detail that struck many as odd. The police began to suspect that Lena might have had a motive for murder. Victor, a wealthy surgeon, had recently amended his will to make Lena the primary beneficiary. If Victor were out of the picture, Lena stood to inherit a substantial fortune. Despite her calm appearance, the police knew they had to dig deeper to understand Lena's true intentions. The second person of interest in Victor Ruiz's death was Amy Liu, a 21-year-old yoga instructor who worked at the beachfront resort where Victor and Lena were staying. Amy was originally from Los Angeles but had moved to Catalina Island to save money for college, where she planned to study kinesiology. Young and carefree, Amy seemed to have a bright future. At least that's what everyone thought. The police soon uncovered that Amy had been involved in a passionate affair with Lena during the Ruiz honeymoon. Several resort employees reported seeing the two women sneaking away together, often while Victor was either asleep or out for a walk. This wasn't just a casual fling. Investigators described Amy as completely under Lena's spell, admitting to having sex with her numerous times after Victor's disappearance, and even after his body was found. Lena, known for her charming but manipulative nature, had easily pulled Amy into her web of deception. On June 22, 2013, Amy was brought in for questioning. Unlike Lena, Amy was visibly shaken and anxious during the interrogation. She confessed to the affair almost immediately but maintained that she had nothing to do with Victor's death. Amy told police that she and Lena had been seeing each other since the couple's arrival on the island, but she insisted she was unaware of any plan to harm Victor. Detective Angela Martinez noted Amy's emotional state, believing that Amy was scared and confused, but not trying to conceal anything about the affair. To the police, Amy seemed more like a pawn in Lena's game than anything else. Amy recounted how Lena had told her that her marriage to Victor was purely a business arrangement and that while she didn't love Victor, she did love his mother, Isabella Ruiz. Lena had even hinted at running away together to the California coast for endless freedom, but Amy never imagined things would go this far. Naive and caught up in the whirlwind of her first romantic relationship with another woman, Amy struggled to comprehend the reality of the situation. Despite her claims of innocence, the police viewed Amy as a person of interest. They were suspicious of her involvement with Lena and wondered whether she had played a role in a larger plan to get rid of Victor. Amy's alibi was shaky. She claimed she had been working at the yoga studio the night Victor disappeared, but her shifts were irregular, and there were no clear records to confirm her whereabouts during the crucial hour. While Amy insisted she had nothing to do with the murder, her involvement with Lena couldn't be ignored. Investigators dug deeper into the young yoga instructor's life, trying to determine just how deeply she had been pulled into Lena's deadly scheme. The investigation took a shocking turn on June 24, 2013, when new evidence came to light. The day started off sunny and warm, typical for Catalina Island in late June. The investigation had stalled until a hotel receptionist, Natalie Brown, came forward with a startling story. Natalie, who had worked at the resort for years, told police she had overheard something disturbing just days before Victor Ruiz's body was found. On the night of June 10, Natalie was working the night shift when she heard strange noises coming from the Ruiz suite. At first, she assumed it was just the couple, but what she heard next made her stop. She distinctly heard two women's voices, one of them being Lena's, clearly engaged in what sounded like rough sex. But what was more alarming, Victor was still in the room, asleep. Natalie explained that she had hesitated to speak up earlier due to her desire to avoid any complications, especially given her personal situation. However, after learning about Victor's death, she felt she had to come forward. When pressed for more details, Natalie confirmed that the other woman she heard was none other than Victor's elderly mother, Isabella Ruiz. This revelation stunned the investigators. They had already confirmed Lena's infidelity, but the fact that she was involved in a sexual relationship with her own mother-in-law was a twist they hadn't anticipated. It completely changed their understanding of the events leading up to Victor's death. Detective Angela Martinez was the first to piece together the implications of Natalie's account. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, and Martinez considered the possibility that Lena and Isabella were using Victor as a cover for their affair. And when that wasn't enough, they plotted to eliminate him. With this new information, the police revisited the crime scene and started digging deeper into the relationship between Lena and Isabella. It wasn't long before more evidence surfaced. Hotel staff recalled frequently seeing the two women together, often leaving Victor behind to have secret encounters in secluded areas of the resort. Other witnesses came forward, describing the strange dynamic between the newlyweds and Isabella. Investigators now believed that Lena and Isabella had been planning Victor's murder for some time. The discovery of their affair added a new layer to their motive. It became clear that Victor had become a barrier to their twisted relationship, an obstacle that needed to be removed. Armed with this new evidence, the police were one step closer to solving the mystery of Victor Ruiz's death. With the new information provided by the hotel receptionist,
detectives shifted their attention to Isabella Ruiz, Victor's 78-year-old mother. Up until this point, Isabella had been viewed as a grieving, long-widowed mother, but her secret relationship with Lena raised serious doubts about her involvement in her son's murder. Isabella was known in Santa Cruz as a strong-willed, wealthy widow with a commanding personality. Even at her advanced age, she kept a tight grip on her son's life and finances, dictating everything from his social engagements to his diet. She was the type of woman who dressed impeccably in brands like Chanel and Hermes and insisted on driving her black Cadillac. Despite suffering from macular degeneration, she had always expected unwavering loyalty from Victor but had been unusually approving of his marriage to Lena. Detectives invited Isabella Ruiz to the station for a formal interview on June 25, 2013. At first, Isabella appeared calm and composed, playing the role of a heartbroken mother. She expressed disbelief that anyone would suspect her or Lena of wrongdoing. "My son was my precious boy," she said, her voice trembling as she dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I would never harm my darling Victor." But when detectives confronted her with the receptionist's testimony and the growing evidence of her secret affair with Lena, Isabella's demeanor shifted. The frail, grieving mother was gone. In her place stood a defensive and angry woman, accusing the police of trying to destroy her family. "This is absurd. You're dragging my name through the mud based on gossip from a hotel worker," she snapped. Despite her protests, detectives noticed cracks in Isabella's story. She couldn't explain why she and Lena had been spending so much time alone together during the honeymoon, or why they had been overheard in intimate situations that sounded unmistakably sexual. The carefully constructed image of the innocent mother-in-law began to crumble under the pressure of the investigation. By this point, detectives had a strong theory. Isabella and Lena had conspired to murder Victor so they could continue their illicit relationship without him in the way. Isabella's possessiveness over both her son and her lover was a driving force. She couldn't stand the idea of losing Lena, especially to someone as important as her own son. Though Isabella denied any involvement, the police were becoming more certain they were closing in on the truth. Her evasive responses and the mounting evidence only deepened their suspicions. The once powerful matriarch now found herself at the center of a scandal she had worked hard to keep hidden. By June 28, 2013, the investigation reached a tipping point. Detectives had uncovered enough evidence to directly connect Isabella Ruiz to her son's murder. The shocking revelation of her affair with Lena, combined with the testimony of the receptionist, who overheard the two women having sex in the same room as Victor while he slept, painted a disturbing picture. The grieving mother had now become the prime suspect, and investigators believed she played an active role in Victor's death. Isabella Ruiz, 78, was known for her manipulative nature. She orchestrated every aspect of his existence, from his finances to his relationships. However, her relationship with Lena Castillo, her daughter-in-law, was even more troubling. It extended beyond familial bounds into a secret, sordid affair that ultimately led the two women to plot Victor's demise. On the night of the murder, Isabella, who possessed the villainous mind of a cartoon supervillain, slipped sleeping pills into Victor's drink. Meanwhile, Lena distracted him with sex. Once Victor was unconscious, Isabella and Lena dragged his body to the beach, staging his death to look like a tragic drowning accident. They hoped the ocean currents would erase any trace of their involvement, but forensic experts soon uncovered bruises on Victor's neck and traces of sedatives in his system. The police arrested Isabella Ruiz at her Santa Cruz estate. It was a quiet afternoon, and she was enjoying her daily cup of tea on her front porch when officers arrived. She was taken into custody without a fight and maintained her innocence, showing little emotion as the handcuffs clicked into place, seemingly expecting the arrest all along. Lena Castillo was also arrested, but further investigation revealed that Isabella had masterminded the entire plan, with Lena deeply under her influence. The news of Isabella's arrest shocked Victor's family and friends. Those who once admired her for her strength and sharp wit were now horrified by the truth. The trial of Isabella Ruiz began in November 2014 and quickly became one of the most talked about cases among true crime enthusiasts in California. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney James O'Connor, argued that Isabella had killed her own son to preserve her secret affair with Lena. O'Connor used the shocking details of the mother-daughter-in-law relationship to paint Isabella as a manipulative and cold-hearted killer. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Mark Randall, tried to portray Isabella Ruiz as a frail old woman who could not possibly have orchestrated such a crime. Randall painted Lena Castillo as the true mastermind, claiming that Isabella had been manipulated into covering up for her daughter-in-law. However, Isabella's stern demeanor on the stand did little to win the jury's sympathy, and they were clearly disturbed by the sordid details of the case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Isabella Ruiz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lena Castillo, though charged as an accessory to murder, received a lighter sentence of 25 years after cooperating with investigators. The verdict brought some relief to Victor's family, but the damage left behind by the shocking betrayal would never fully heal. Many felt that justice had been served, but Victor's tragic death and the circumstances surrounding it left a dark cloud over the Ruiz family for years to come. After the trial, life changed drastically for everyone involved. Isabella Ruiz, the mother convicted of murdering her son, was sent to a state prison in California. Despite her sharp wit and strong personality, life behind bars proved challenging. Isabella tried to maintain her dignity, but the isolation and stigma of her crime weighed heavily on her. In prison, she was often the target of gossip and disdain from other inmates. Over the years, Isabella's health began to decline, and in 2021 she contracted COVID-19 during a surge in cases. Despite efforts to treat her, she passed away alone in a prison hospital. News of her death made headlines, with some former friends and family expressing mixed feelings about her fate. Lena Castillo, Victor's widow, faced a different kind of consequence after her reduced sentence of 25 years. She served her time in a women's correctional facility, often reminiscing about her life before the murder. During her incarceration, she sought therapy to deal with her feelings of guilt and confusion about her relationships. Lena maintained her innocence regarding the actual murder but acknowledged her role in the events that unfolded. Amy Liu, the young yoga instructor who had become entangled in the scandal, also faced her own struggles. Though Amy was never charged with any crime, the fallout from the trial affected her reputation. She continued to work at the resort for a few years after the events, but the whispers of the affair haunted her. In search of a fresh start, Amy eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where she enrolled in college. Rachel Martinez couldn't pinpoint the exact moment her perfect life began to unravel, but she could trace the threads of her story back to where they first intertwined with Miguel's, that fateful property showing in the summer of 2015. Standing in her home office in the Horizon Tower, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's betrayal, she found herself replaying those early memories with newfound clarity. Born to academic parents in Santa Monica in 1990, Rachel had grown up with an almost obsessive attention to detail, a trait inherited from her mathematician father that would later prove both a blessing and a curse. Her childhood home had been a haven of logical thinking and emotional intelligence, with her mother's psychology practice providing a constant backdrop of human behavioral analysis. These influences shaped her into someone who could read both spreadsheets and people with equal precision. Her path to real estate hadn't been direct. After graduating from UCLA with honors in business administration, she had dabbled in investment banking, but found the work unfulfilling. It was during her first serious relationship, a 2-year engagement that ended with her fiancé's infidelity, that she discovered her talent for property. The process of finding her own place after the breakup had been therapeutic, and her analytical mind found satisfaction in the complex dynamics of real estate transactions. By 2015, at age 25, Rachel had established herself as one of Los Angeles' rising stars in luxury real estate. She had also built careful walls around her heart, the betrayal of her past relationship leaving her with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a carefully maintained set of defenses. Then Miguel Martinez walked into her life, and those defenses crumbled like sand castles in the tide. The property showing was for a $12 million beachfront estate in Malibu. Miguel arrived 15 minutes early, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of success without trying too hard. His smile lit up the marble foyer as he introduced himself, and Rachel felt an immediate spark of connection that both thrilled and terrified her. "I apologize for my early arrival," he had said, his slight accent adding charm to his words. "I find that punctuality is a poor substitute for eagerness." The line should have been cheesy, but delivered with his warm brown eyes fixed on hers, it felt like poetry. What followed was the stuff of local legend in their social circle. Their 3-hour property tour turned into dinner, which became a weekend of intense conversation and undeniable chemistry. Miguel pursued Rachel with a single-minded focus that swept away her reservations. Every detail was perfect. Flowers delivered to her office, surprise lunch dates, handwritten notes left on her car. He seemed to anticipate her every need, creating a courtship that felt like a fairy tale. Looking back, Rachel could now see how Miguel had perfectly crafted his approach. He had studied her, understanding that her analytical mind needed logical progression while her wounded heart craved romantic gestures. He built their relationship like one of his construction projects, with careful planning and flawless execution. Miguel's own story, as he told it then, seemed equally perfect. Born in Mexico City in 1988, he had come to the United States at age 10 when his father's construction business expanded northward. He had worked his way up from job sites to project management, eventually starting his own company. His success was self-made, his ambitions seemingly matched only by his devotion to Rachel. What Rachel didn't know then, what she would only discover years later through painstaking investigation, was that Miguel's charm had left a trail of broken hearts across Los Angeles' professional landscape. His construction company had provided the perfect cover for a pattern of seduction and manipulation that spanned years. Female clients, architects, and project managers had all fallen victim to his carefully orchestrated romances. Their whirlwind courtship culminated in a proposal after just 6 months. Miguel arranged a private sunset dinner on the rooftop of what would become their home, the exclusive Horizon Tower. He had supposedly just completed the building's construction, though Rachel would later learn this too was part of his elaborate web of deception. The proposal was witnessed by a random photographer who happened to capture the moment perfectly, and their engagement appeared in several local magazines. Rachel threw herself into their relationship with the same intensity she brought to her career. She scaled back her working hours, turned down opportunities for expansion, and focused on creating their perfect home. Her friends warned her she was moving too fast, but she dismissed their concerns. After all, she was the one who understood numbers, patterns, and probability. She had built a life centered around her children, working hard to create a stable, loving home in their quiet Minnesota community. Those who knew Victoria best said she approached motherhood with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything in life. Her boys were her world, and she had carefully chosen the Riverside Apartments complex for its safe neighborhood and proximity to their school. Every morning, she would wait early to make their breakfast, never missing a school event or sports game. The thought that she would miss her birthday breakfast with them was unthinkable to those who knew her dedication as a mother. Victoria always saw the good in everyone, her sister would later write in a heartbreaking social media post. That's who she was, someone who believed in giving people a chance, in the basic goodness of others. This trusting nature, a quality that made her so beloved in her community, would ultimately be exploited by the man who took her life. The day before her murder, Victoria had been excitedly planning her 39th birthday celebration with her sons. She had promised them a special breakfast the next morning, followed by a day at their favorite park. Her last text to her best friend read, "Can't wait for tomorrow, another year older, but grateful for every moment with my boys." Those words would later be read at her memorial service, a testament to the devoted mother whose life was cut tragically short. Victoria's apartment reflected her personality, warm, welcoming, and filled with photos of her children. On her refrigerator, investigators found a calendar marked with her son's activities, upcoming school events, and her own birthday circled in bright red marker. The morning she was killed, she had planned to open birthday cards her boys had carefully hidden in the kitchen cabinet the night before. What made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was how hard Victoria had worked to create a safe, stable life. She was known for being cautious,
especially when it came to her children's safety. Her decision to trust Christopher Neal that night seemed out of character to those who knew her best, but friends later recalled how he had cleverly used their shared hometown connection to lower her guard. She probably felt safe because he knew all the same places, all the same people. One friend noted. He used that familiarity to make her feel comfortable. The investigation would reveal that Victoria had spent that final evening at a bar she knew well, surrounded by familiar faces. She wasn't the type to go home with strangers, but Neal had spent hours gaining her confidence, playing on their shared background and appearing harmless. Security footage showed him acting charming and friendly, giving no indication of the violence that would follow. August 11, 2024, started as a typical summer evening in Sauk Rapids. Victoria had decided to stop by Murphy's Bar, a local establishment she frequently visited with friends, for a quiet drink before her birthday. The security footage from that night would later become crucial evidence, capturing every moment of her fateful encounter with Christopher Neal. At 11:47 p.m., cameras showed Victoria entering the bar wearing a blue summer dress, her favorite silver necklace catching the light. She chose a seat at the corner of the bar, ordering what would be her first and only drink of the night. It was around midnight when Christopher Neal first approached her. The security footage showed him deliberately choosing the seat next to her, despite several empty spaces at the bar. What initially seemed like a chance encounter would later reveal itself as something more calculated. Neal, as captured on the bar's cameras, spent the next hour engaging Victoria in conversation. He mentioned knowing her hometown, dropping names of places and people she knew. With each shared connection, Victoria's natural wariness seemed to fade. The footage showed her becoming more animated, laughing at his stories, her guard lowering with each passing minute. He seemed so normal, so familiar. The bartender would later tell investigators. They looked like old friends catching up, but Neal was far from the harmless figure he portrayed. Just 9 days earlier, he had been released on bail for a violent strangulation attack, a fact Victoria had no way of knowing as she sat beside him. At 1 a.m., the cameras captured what would be Victoria's final moments in public. Neal had offered to drive her home, citing concerns about her safety. The bitter irony of this gesture wouldn't be lost on investigators. Victoria was seen gathering her purse, her car keys glinting in her hand as she led the way to her black Chevy Equinox. The drive to Riverside Apartments took only 5 minutes. Security cameras in the parking lot recorded their arrival at 1:05 a.m. Victoria appeared relaxed, laughing at something Neal said as they walked toward the building's entrance. She used her key fob to let them in, the door closing behind them at 1:07 a.m. It would be the last time Victoria was seen alive. What transpired in the next 2 hours would only be pieced together through forensic evidence and the signs of struggle left behind. The layout of Victoria's apartment suggested she had initially invited Neal in willingly, perhaps for coffee or conversation.
2 cups were found on the kitchen counter, one with traces of lipstick matching Victoria's shade, the other untouched. The violence appeared to have erupted suddenly. Evidence indicated that Victoria had fought desperately for her life. Her broken nails, the overturned furniture, and the scattered contents of her purse painted a picture of a terrifying struggle. The medical examiner would later determine that the attack lasted several minutes, with Victoria conscious and fighting throughout most of it. At precisely 3 a.m., security cameras captured Neal leaving the building alone. His earlier friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by furtive glances and attempts to hide his face. He carried Victoria's car keys, which investigators noted had been in her purse, not on the counter as he would later claim. The footage showed him getting into Victoria's Equinox and driving away, leaving her lying lifeless in the apartment where she had built a home for her children. The investigation into Victoria's murder shifted into high gear once detectives realized they weren't just dealing with a random act of violence, but potentially the work of a serial offender. The crime scene at Riverside Apartments became a focal point of forensic activity, with investigators meticulously documenting every detail of the tragic final moments of Victoria's life. The medical examiner's findings painted a horrific picture of Victoria's final struggle. The bruising patterns on her neck told a story that contradicted Neal's claims of innocence. These weren't the marks of a brief encounter, noted the lead forensic investigator. The injuries showed sustained pressure, applied with practiced precision. Most disturbing was the similarity to the injuries reported in Neal's previous assault case, a pattern that suggested not just violence, but a signature method of attack. DNA evidence would prove crucial to the investigation. Swabs taken from Victoria's neck revealed genetic material from 2 sources. Neal's DNA emerged as the dominant profile, particularly concentrated in areas showing the worst bruising. A second, Weaker DNA profile was also detected, but investigators quickly determined this likely came from casual contact earlier in the day, perhaps from one of her children or a friend. Victoria's apartment, typically kept immaculate for her children, had become a map of her final fight for life. A broken lamp in the living room suggested where the attack began. Scattered cushions and an overturned coffee table traced her desperate attempt to escape. Most telling was her bedroom, where investigators found her phone still plugged into its charger. She never had a chance to call for help. The evidence trail extended beyond the apartment. Security footage from neighboring buildings captured Neil's exit from the complex in Victoria's car. Traffic cameras tracked the black Chevy Equinox heading south on Highway 10, then merging onto Interstate 35. Each ping from Victoria's stolen cell phone helped investigators track Neil's flight to Louisiana, where he apparently believed he could evade detection. When authorities finally caught up with Neil at a motel just outside New Orleans, they found more damning evidence. Victoria's car keys were in his pocket, her credit cards in his wallet. Her phone had been wiped clean and abandoned in a dumpster 3 states away. These weren't the actions of someone who, as Neil claimed, had left a woman alive and well in her apartment. Most incriminating was Neil's behavior during questioning. His claim of limited memory about the events in Victoria's apartment stood in stark contrast to his precise recall of their earlier conversation at the bar. He remembered details about their shared hometown but claimed to forget her name. When shown photos of Victoria's apartment, he recognized where he had been but insisted he couldn't remember what had happened there. The autopsy results delivered the final pieces of evidence needed to build a solid case. Victoria had died between 2:30 and 3 a.m., exactly the time frame when Neil was still in her apartment. The cause of death was manual strangulation, with defensive wounds on her hands and arms showing she had fought desperately until her last breath. Most chillingly, the method of strangulation matched exactly the technique described by Neil's previous victim, a woman who had survived to tell her story just 9 days earlier. Christopher Neil's path to becoming Victoria's alleged killer didn't begin the night they met at Murphy's bar. As investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of escalating violence that painted a picture of a predator growing increasingly bold and dangerous with each passing year. Just 9 days before Victoria's murder, on August 1, 2024, Neil had faced charges for a strikingly similar attack. In that case, he had allegedly strangled a woman he was dating in Akin County. The victim survived to tell a haunting story that would later mirror Victoria's final moments. He seemed so normal at first, she had told police. Then something changed in his eyes, and his hands were around my throat. Despite the severity of this attack, Neil was released on bail on August 3rd, given a no-contact order, and walked free. But this wasn't just about 2 isolated incidents. As investigators pieced together Neil's history, they found a trail of police reports, restraining orders, and domestic disturbance calls stretching back years. Women in different counties had reported similar encounters, charm turning to violence, with strangulation being his weapon of choice. Most cases had been handled as routine domestic disputes, the pattern going unnoticed until it was too late. The evolution of Neil's violence was particularly chilling. He had started with domestic incidents, attacking women who knew him. Victoria represented a deadly escalation, the first time he had allegedly targeted a stranger. The shift from domestic violence to attacking someone he had just met showed a predator growing more confident, more brazen in his choices of victims. His method of approaching victims revealed careful calculation. With Victoria, he had used their shared hometown connection to gain trust. Security footage from Murphy's bar showed him watching her for nearly an hour before making his move, waiting until she was alone before approaching. This wasn't opportunistic violence. It was practiced, planned predation. Even more disturbing was Neil's behavior after each attack. In previous cases, he had shown a pattern of minimizing his actions, claiming memory loss, or insisting the women had exaggerated their injuries. With Victoria's case, he followed the same playbook, admitting to being in her apartment but claiming no memory of the violence, despite the clear evidence of his deliberate actions afterward. The violation of his no-contact order from the August 1st case revealed another aspect of Neil's personality, a complete disregard for legal restrictions. On the very day Victoria's body was discovered, August 12th, the Akin County Sheriff's Office was already processing paperwork for his violation of the order. He had allegedly attempted to contact his previous victim, showing a pattern of continued harassment that would only end with his arrest for Victoria's murder. What made Neil particularly dangerous was his ability to appear harmless. Bar patrons who saw him with Victoria described him as charming, well-spoken, and completely normal. This facade of normality allowed him to move through society virtually undetected, making him the kind of predator that law enforcement finds most challenging to stop before tragedy strikes. The manhunt for Christopher Neal ended at the Red Pine Motel, a rundown establishment just outside New Orleans, Louisiana. After nearly a week of tracking cell phone signals and following Victoria's stolen credit card transactions, authorities finally closed in on August 18, 2024. They found Victoria's black Chevy Equinox parked outside room 114, its Minnesota plates covered with mud in an apparent attempt to avoid detection. The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Neal surrendered without resistance when federal marshals and local police breached his room at 6:15 a.m. He was found fully dressed, lying on top of the bed covers, as if he had been expecting them. In his possession were Victoria's car keys, credit cards, and apartment key fob, items he had taken from her purse after allegedly taking her life. What struck investigators was Neal's demeanor during arrest. He showed no emotion, no signs of distress or surprise. When informed he was being charged with Victoria's murder, he reportedly just nodded and said, "I want a lawyer." This cold composure contrasted sharply with the violent struggle evidenced in Victoria's apartment just days before. The charges against Neal began to stack up quickly. In Benton County, where Victoria's murder occurred, prosecutors filed second-degree murder charges. The criminal complaint detailed the brutality of the attack, citing the medical examiner's findings of severe neck trauma and defensive wounds. The DNA evidence, security footage, and Neal's flight to Louisiana were listed as key elements supporting the murder charge. But Neal's legal troubles extended beyond Victoria's case. In Akin County, he still faced charges for the August 1st strangulation attack. The violation of his no-contact order from that case added another charge. Prosecutors in both counties began coordinating their efforts, building a case that would show Neal's pattern of escalating violence. During his first court appearance in Benton County, Neal maintained his story of limited memory about the night of Victoria's death. Through his court-appointed attorney, he entered a not guilty plea. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They described a calculated predator who had watched Victoria at the bar, gained her trust through manipulation, and then killed her in her own home. The bail hearing revealed the full extent of the prosecution's concerns about Neal's danger to society. They presented evidence of his previous strangulation attack, the violated no-contact order, and his attempt to flee the state. The judge, noting the escalating pattern of violence and flight risk, ordered Neal held without bail, a decision that brought visible relief to Victoria's family in the courtroom. As Neal was led away in shackles, attention turned to the broader implications of his case. Questions arose about how he had been free to allegedly kill Victoria despite the recent strangulation charge. The prosecutor's office faced scrutiny over their handling of his previous case, where he had been released on bail despite showing clear signs of being a danger to women. In the quiet Minnesota town of Sauk Rapids, the impact of Victoria's murder rippled through the community like shockwaves. Her two young boys, who had waited eagerly for their mother to join them for birthday breakfast that August morning, now faced a future without her guidance, love, and ever-present smile. Their lives, once filled with the routine of school days and their mother's constant presence, had been shattered by one night of senseless violence. Victoria's family launched a GoFundMe page, not just to cover funeral expenses, but to create a trust fund for her son's future. The page became a testament to who Victoria was, filled with stories from those who knew her. She was more than just a victim, wrote her sister. Victoria was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She taught her boys to be kind, to be strong, and to always help others. Now we have to help them carry on without her. The local community's response was overwhelming. Murphy's Bar, where Victoria spent her final hours, hosted a fundraiser for her children. Regular patrons shared stories of her infectious laugh, her proud conversations about her boys' achievements, and her bubbly personality that could brighten even the darkest days. She wasn't just another customer, the bartender recalled. Victoria was family to everyone who knew her, but beneath the outpouring of support ran an undercurrent of anger and frustration. Victoria's death had exposed critical failures in a system designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Her family spoke out publicly about these systemic gaps. 9 days, her brother said during a community meeting, just 9 days between Neal's release and Victoria's death. The system had him in custody, knew he was dangerous, and still let him walk free. The impact of Victoria's death extended beyond her immediate circle. Local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls for help, with many women citing her story as their wake-up call. The Sauk Rapids Police Department began reviewing its protocols for handling strangulation cases, acknowledging that these incidents often precede more serious violence. In a cruel twist of fate, Victoria's birthday, August 12, now marks both her death and her legacy. Her family has established the Victoria Gamble Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stricter bail conditions in strangulation cases. "We couldn't save Victoria," her mother said at the foundation's launch, "but maybe we can save someone else's daughter, someone else's mother." As Christopher Neal awaits trial in Benton County, Victoria's story continues to resonate. Her death has become a catalyst for change, prompting discussions about how the justice system handles violent offenders and the need for better protection for potential victims. But for those who loved her, Victoria was more than a cautionary tale or a statistic. She was a mother who lived for her children, a friend who never failed to lift others up, and a woman whose trust in others ultimately cost her everything. Today, Victoria's apartment at Riverside remains empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. Her black Chevy Equinox, recovered from Louisiana, sits in an evidence lot, but her spirit lives on through her sons, through the foundation bearing her name, and through the changes her death has inspired in her community. While it's too late for Victoria, her story serves as both a warning and a call to action, a reminder that patterns of violence, left unchecked, can escalate with devastating consequences. July 15, 2018, 3:47 p.m. The thermometer on the pristine porch of 1242 Maple Drive read 97 degrees. But the real story wasn't the Memphis heat. Behind the freshly painted cream walls and meticulously maintained rose gardens of this East Memphis showpiece, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the carefully constructed illusions of Magnolia Heights forever. Sarah Mitchell's Victorian mansion stood as a monument to perfection, every blade of grass measured, every window gleaming in the Tennessee sun. But perfection, as the residents of this exclusive suburb would soon learn, often comes at a devastating price. The thing about Sarah, Barbara Watson would later tell the grand jury, her hands trembling around a glass of water, was that she worked so hard to make everything look perfect. Maybe too hard. Sarah Mitchell hadn't always been the widow of Maple Drive. 8 months ago, she'd been Sarah Mitchell, wife of James Mitchell, one of Memphis's most successful real estate developers. At 42, she was what her friends called preserved, a woman who fought aging with the same determination she'd once used to climb the real estate rankings. Her chocolate brown hair was always freshly highlighted, her tennis skirts precisely the right length to suggest country club propriety while hinting at something more. The $2 million life insurance policy James left her meant she never had to work again. The 4-bedroom Victorian meant she had space to host the neighborhood's most coveted dinner parties. But money couldn't fill the silence in her king-sized bed, couldn't replace the sound of her husband's keys in the door every evening at 6. After James died, something changed in her eyes. Lisa Anderson, her next-door neighbor, would observe during the investigation. Like she was hungry for something money couldn't buy. That hunger found its target in Kevin Anderson, Lisa's 17-year-old son. 6 feet 2 inches of junior Olympic swimming potential living just over the pristine hedge that separated their properties. Team captain with a 4.2 GPA and shoulders that made the mothers at Swim Meets Whisper behind their hands. The University of Texas had already dangled a full scholarship in front of him, contingent on his performance at the state championships. Kevin was different from the other boys, Coach Thompson would testify. More mature, maybe too mature for his own good. You see it sometimes with kids raised by single parents. They grow up too fast. Lisa Anderson had raised Kevin alone since his father disappeared with his secretary and most of their savings when Kevin was 5. Working double shifts in the Methodist Hospital ER, she'd somehow managed to get them into Magnolia Heights, determined to give her son the opportunities she never had. The swimming scholarship was supposed to be their ticket to something better. "I should have seen it coming," Lisa would sob in the witness stand months later. The signs were all there. The new clothes he couldn't explain. The late-night texts. The way he started missing morning practice to help Mrs. Mitchell with the yard. What kind of yard work happens at 7 a.m.? James Mitchell's death had been sudden. A massive heart attack during his morning jog. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The health-conscious businessman who never smoked, never drank, dropped dead on the running trail he'd helped fund through his charitable foundation. He left behind not just a grieving widow, but a legacy of community involvement that made Sarah's position in neighborhood society untouchable. Or so everyone thought. Barbara Watson, a retired English teacher whose bay window offered a perfect view of the Mitchell property, kept a detailed diary of neighborhood activities, a habit she'd never broken since her teaching days. Her entries would later become crucial to Detective Michael Torres's investigation. The boy was over there all the time, she would tell him, flipping through pages of careful observations. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A teenager helping a widow with house maintenance. But then I noticed the way she watched him from her kitchen window. The way her hand would linger on his arm during their conversations. I taught high school for 30 years, detective. I know what trouble looks like before it happens. Coach Thompson had been the first to notice the changes in Kevin's performance. The boy who'd been seconds away from breaking the state record in the 200-meter freestyle was suddenly struggling to maintain his captain position. His time started slipping in June, Thompson would report. I asked if everything was okay at home. He said he was just tired from doing extra work to help his mom with bills. I should have pushed harder for answers. Detective Michael Torres, a 20-year veteran of Memphis homicide, would later piece together the pattern that everyone had seen but no one had wanted to acknowledge. A widow too young and too beautiful, struggling with grief and loneliness. A teenage boy mature beyond his years, carrying the weight of his mother's sacrifices. A neighborhood too focused on maintaining appearances to see the tragedy unfolding behind perfectly trimmed hedges. In cases like these, Torres would later write in his report, everyone thinks they know the whole story. The grieving widow, the helpful neighbor boy, the concerned community. But behind closed doors, behind those perfect facades, there's always another layer. And sometimes, peeling back those layers reveals something that no one wants to see. Sarah Mitchell maintained her social calendar with military precision that summer. Wednesday book club, Thursday tennis, Sunday brunch at the country club. Everything designed to show the world she was handling widowhood with grace and dignity. But the cracks were starting to show. She started missing tennis matches, her doubles partner would later recall. She who never missed a game, not even the week after James died. And when she did show up, she seemed distracted. Kept checking her phone. We all assumed she was dating again. We just never imagined. The stage was set. The players were in position. And in the stifling heat of a Memphis summer, behind the pristine facade of 1242 Maple Drive, a story of desire, desperation, and death was about to unfold that would leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their perfect neighborhood. Magnolia Heights wasn't just any Memphis suburb. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of old money and new ambitions. Streets named after flowers curved gracefully between homes that started at 7 figures, each one trying to outshine its neighbor while pretending not to try at all. The kind of neighborhood where gardeners arrived every Thursday at exactly 9 a.m. And deviation from this schedule was cause for urgent discussion at the Weekend Garden Club. The Mitchell house sat at the intersection of Maple Drive and Magnolia Circle, commanding attention from every angle. A 3-story Victorian painted in historical cream with hunter green trim. It boasted original stained glass windows that cast colorful shadows across the wraparound porch. The house had been James's wedding gift to Sarah, purchased when she was still a rising star at Memphis Elite Realty. The layout was like something from Architectural Digest, Detective Torres would note in his initial report. Main floor, formal living room, dining room, gourmet kitchen opening to a family room with French doors leading to the pool area. Second floor, master suite, 3 bedrooms converted to a home office, library, and gym. Third floor, what Mrs. Mitchell called her private retreat, significant to the case's later developments. But it was the pool house that would become the focal point of the investigation. A recent addition James had completed just months before his death. It featured a changing area, full bathroom, and a small kitchenette. The perfect pool house for entertaining, Sarah had once boasted at a garden club meeting. She didn't know then how those words would come back to haunt her. The social hierarchy of Magnolia Heights operated on subtle but rigid rules. At the top sat the founding families, those who'd been there since the suburb's inception in the 1960s. The Mitchells, despite their wealth, were relatively new money, just 12 years in the neighborhood. But James's philanthropy and Sarah's social finesse had earned them acceptance among the elite. The Andersons, living in what was arguably the most modest home in Magnolia Heights, existed on the periphery of this social structure. Lisa's position as an ER nurse garnered respect, but her single mother status and mortgage struggles kept her from full acceptance into the inner circle. 8 months after James's death, the neighborhood was still adjusting to its new dynamic. Sarah's position had shifted, no longer half of Magnolia Heights' power couple, but not quite relegated to the ranks of the other widows who lived quietly with their memories and cats. She existed in a sort of social limbo, maintained by her wealth and her legendary dinner parties. The summer of 2018 pressed down on Memphis like a hot, wet blanket. Air conditioners hummed constantly, and the normally busy sidewalks emptied by 10 a.m. as residents retreated into their climate-controlled sanctuaries. But behind drawn curtains and closed doors, tensions were building. Sarah's isolation grew incrementally, like shadows lengthening across her perfect lawn. First, she missed a tennis match, a previously unthinkable occurrence. Then the Wednesday book club began meeting at Caroline Peterson's house instead of hers. She said she was redecorating. Caroline would later tell Detective Torres. But we could see Kevin Anderson's truck parked in her driveway through the front window. The yard work became a neighborhood talking point, though never directly addressed. Kevin would arrive early, often before the dew had dried on the grass. His sessions grew longer, more frequent. The lawn that only needed mowing once a week somehow required attention every other day. I saw him washing her car one morning, Barbara Watson noted in her journal, shirtless, while she watched from the porch. In my day, we had more discretion. Lisa Anderson's concerns grew with each passing week. The scholarship offers that had once crowded their mailbox dwindled to a trickle. Kevin's times in the pool kept slipping, tenths of seconds adding up to missed opportunities. He was making money, Lisa would later tell the grand jury. Her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a double shift. But things weren't adding up. New clothes, an expensive watch, more than yard work should pay. When I asked, he said Mrs. Mitchell was generous with tips. Something in my gut told me there was more to it. The financial pressures in the Anderson household mounted. Lisa had taken out a second mortgage to keep them in Magnolia Heights, banking everything on Kevin's swimming scholarship. Each missed practice, each declined time, was another crack in their carefully planned future. Coach Thompson's concerns became more urgent. It wasn't just his times, he would testify. His focus was gone. He'd space out during team meetings, check his phone constantly. I caught him texting during practice, something the old Kevin would never have done. The whispers started at the country club, spread through tennis matches and garden club meetings. Sarah's behavior became a source of carefully worded concern. Her clothes got younger, tighter. The dinner parties that had once been elegant affairs became louder, lasted later. Looking back, Barbara Watson would later say, "We all saw what was happening. We just didn't want to believe it. Not in our neighborhood, not with our people, but in Magnolia Heights, where appearance was everything and secrets were currency. The truth was about to explode into the open in a way that no amount of social finesse could smooth over." June 8, 2018 marked the beginning of a tragedy that would shatter Magnolia Heights forever. The morning started like any other. Kevin Anderson arrived at 9:30 a.m. to clean the Mitchell pool, a job he'd been doing 3 times a week since James's death. Sarah Mitchell watched from her kitchen window, nursing what she would later admit to Detective Torres was her third mimosa of the morning. It would have been James's birthday. Sarah's voice would crack during questioning. He would have been 46. I found his gift in the back of my closet that morning, a Rolex I'd bought months before. I couldn't stop staring at it. The temperature had already hit 91 degrees, and Kevin had stripped off his shirt as he skimmed leaves from the pool. At 17, his swimmer's physique drew glances from neighborhood girls, but until that morning, Sarah had maintained professional distance. I heard her crying before I saw her, Kevin's statement would read, "Not loud crying. That quiet kind that's somehow worse." She was standing there in a white tennis dress, holding a glass of lemonade, and just breaking. The security camera footage would later show Sarah's approach to the pool. 10:47 a.m., her steps unsteady, mascara slightly smeared. She stood watching Kevin work for 3 full minutes before speaking. "I miss him so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone expects me to be over it by now. 8 months is enough grieving, they say. Back to tennis, back to book club, back to normal." She laughed bitterly. What's normal about sleeping alone in a bed meant for two? Kevin, unprepared for such raw emotion, did what he'd been raised to do. He listened. He set down the pool skimmer and faced her fully, offering the kind of attention that lonely people crave. She wasn't Mrs. Mitchell in that moment, he would later tell his lawyer. She was just Sarah, a person drowning in grief while everyone else was swimming in their perfect lives. The touch came naturally, her hand on his bare arm as she spoke, his awkward pat on her shoulder turning into something more lingering. The security footage shows them standing close, too close, for several minutes. "I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months," Sarah's diary would reveal. "He looked at me like I was real, not just James Mitchell's widow putting on a brave face." The kiss, when it came, surprised them both. Neither would later admit to initiating it. But in the privacy of her pool house, surrounded by the scent of chlorine and summer flowers, lines were crossed that could never be uncrossed. "I knew it was wrong," carrying proof of Crawford's previous victims. Security caught her meters from the bridal suite. Crawford pressed no charges. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. The wedding video, later reviewed by investigators, captured telling moments. Crawford's possessive grip during photos. Victoria's flinch when he touched her face. The best man's toast referencing Crawford's appreciation for youth. Most telling was the footage from unused angles. Victoria mouthing, "Help me," to a server. Crawford's whispered threats between poses, security guards blocking all exits. As the reception ended, Victoria stood on the grand staircase for the final photos. Her bouquet landed at Sophie's feet. She had sneaked back in wearing catering staff uniform. It was their last contact before the honeymoon. Inside the flowers, Sophie found a small note, USB in violin. "Show Blackwood everything." The newlyweds departed at midnight for the Maldives. Crawford, ever the showman, carried his bride to the waiting limousine. Guests cheered at the romantic gesture. None saw his fingers digging into her ribs or heard his whispered warning, "Remember our agreement." Accidents happen on honeymoons. Victoria Anderson became Victoria Crawford with a signature and a kiss. She entered a prison built of wealth and threats, sealed by vows and violence. Her wedding was a masterclass in manipulation, a $5 million facade hiding a transaction of power and control. But in her final act of defiance, she had planted the seeds of Crawford's destruction, evidence that would outlive her final days in paradise. Azure Dreams Resort welcomed the Crawfords on July 12, 2022. Villa 247, isolated on the resort's northern tip, became both paradise and prison. Security footage shows Victoria stumbling as they entered. Staff noted her dilated pupils, suggesting forced sedation during the flight. The abuse escalated immediately. Resort cameras captured Victoria running through the beach at 3 a.m. their first night. Crawford's security team intercepting her before she reached the main building. Guest services logged noise complaints from neighboring villas. Furniture being moved, the report stated. The next morning, Victoria appeared at breakfast wearing long sleeves despite the tropical heat. Her last successful contact with Sophie came through a borrowed phone from housekeeping. "He found something on my phone. Photos of documents from his office. He's been talking to someone about cleaning up loose ends. I think this is it. Sophie. If I don't." The call disconnected. The housekeeper was relocated to another property that afternoon. July 14th brought the final pieces into place. Crawford held meetings with unknown visitors in his villa. Staff reported deliveries of unusual supplies, industrial cleaning materials, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, diving equipment. Victoria made 4 attempts to use the resort's business center computer. Each time, security arrived within minutes to escort her back. Hotel staff documented increasing concerns. Head chef Marco Rossi reported Victoria's hands shaking too badly to hold her fork at dinner. Spa therapist Amy Chen noted, severe bruising inconsistent with normal activities. Beach attendant Raj Patel observed Crawford's aggressive handling of Victoria during a supposedly romantic sunset walk. The last verified sighting came at 7:43 p.m. on July 15th. Security footage shows Victoria entering the beachfront restaurant alone, a rare moment without Crawford's surveillance. She borrowed waitress Amora Rashid's phone, made a brief call later traced to a burner phone in Sophie's possession. Her final words recorded, "He knows about the files. All of it. The girls, the islands, everything. I hid." The call cut off. Crawford reported her missing 36 hours later. His timeline claimed she went for a midnight swim. Resort logs show different activity. 8:15 p.m., Crawford meets 2 unidentified men at villa. 9:30 p.m., security cameras on North Beach malfunction. 10:45 p.m., unusual boat activity near villa's private dock. 11:50 p.m., power fluctuation in Villa 247. 2:30 a.m., Crawford's security team loads heavy bags into boat. 4:15 a.m., cleaning crew requested for villa. 5 a.m., Crawford makes first of 3 calls to his lawyers. The crime scene, when finally processed, revealed careful cleanup. However, trace evidence remained. Blood residue in shower drain. Lisa would later sob to Detective Torres, "A mother knows. God help me. I knew something was wrong. I just never imagined, never thought." By early August, the situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah had stopped attending book club entirely. Kevin's scholarship offers sat unopened in the mail. They were lost in their own world, blind to the growing suspicions around them. Barbara Watson's final journal entry before the incident would prove prophetic. Watched Sarah and the Anderson boy by the pool today. There's something dangerous in the way they look at each other. In my 30 years of teaching, I've seen that look before. It never ends well. The fuse was lit. The only question was who would be caught in the explosion. The beginning of the end started with a mother's routine task. On August 2, 2018, Lisa Anderson was doing laundry in her modest Memphis home when she discovered something that would shatter her world. A Cartier receipt tucked into her son's swim team jacket pocket. $7,000, Lisa would later tell Detective Torres. Her nurse's uniform still wrinkled from another double shift. My son, who made $12 in our cleaning pools, had somehow bought a watch worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. The receipt was just the beginning. Hidden in Kevin's desk drawer, wrapped in an old swim meet program, Lisa found a burner phone filled with messages that made her heart stop. Hundreds of texts to someone saved simply as S, each one more damning than the last. Barbara Watson, still watching from her window across the street, documented the changes in her meticulous journal. Kevin stopped coming home after practice, she wrote. His car would appear in the evening, parked 2 streets over, thinking no one would notice. But in Magnolia Heights, someone always notices. At Memphis East High School, Kevin Anderson's transformation from star athlete to troubled teen happened with frightening speed. Janet Myers, the school counselor, began keeping a separate file documenting her concerns. He was like a different person, Myers would later testify. The focused, ambitious boy who'd never missed a practice was suddenly sleeping through classes. His GPA dropped from a 4.2 to a 2.8 in less than 2 months. Coach Thompson watched helplessly as his star swimmer's times plummeted. Texas called on August 15th, he recalled during the investigation. They said they were re-evaluating their scholarship offer. In coach speak, that means it's already gone. But it was Sarah Mitchell's behavior that truly set the neighborhood tongues wagging. The elegant widow who once hosted Magnolia Heights' most sophisticated dinner parties now appeared disheveled at morning swim meets, wearing clothes that raised knowing eyebrows among the country club set. She stopped trying to hide it, Barbara Watson noted. The way she looked at that boy, like a drowning person looking at air. The financial entanglement deepened with frightening speed. Bank records would later show Sarah making large cash withdrawals, $3,000 here, $5,000 there. Kevin suddenly sported designer clothes and a new MacBook Pro, items his mother's nursing salary couldn't possibly afford. Richard Harrison, the Mitchell family attorney, noticed the suspicious patterns in Sarah's spending. The trust James left had strict provisions, Harrison would testify. Sarah was burning through money like someone who didn't expect to need it much longer. Everything changed on August 20th. A plain white envelope appeared in Sarah's mailbox, containing poolside photos that left nothing to imagination. The blackmailer demanded $50,000 in exchange for silence. Security footage from that evening shows Sarah running barefoot across her manicured lawn to the pool house, phone in hand. The conversation that followed would later be played in court, a frantic woman realizing her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Lisa Anderson finally confronted her son on August 23rd, after finding a handwritten love letter that confirmed her worst fears. The conversation, as she would later tell Detective Torres through tears, revealed how far gone her son already was. He looked at me with James Mitchell's watch on his wrist and lied to my face, Lisa recalled. My son, who'd never so much as missed curfew, stood there telling me I was imagining things while wearing evidence of his lies on his body. The community's whispers turned to shouts when Sarah missed James's memorial service at First Presbyterian. Instead of honoring her dead husband's memory, security cameras at Memphis International Airport captured her with Kevin in the short-term parking lot. Engaged in what one witness described as an emotional confrontation, anonymous tips began flooding school administration, each one more detailed than the last, building a picture that no one wanted to see but couldn't ignore. By August 25th, the school had no choice but to act. Kevin's suspension from the swim team made the local news, another crack in the facade of Magnolia Heights' perfect veneer. The second blackmail demand arrived on August 27th, $100,000 this time, with copies of text messages that would destroy them both. Sarah withdrew the money without hesitation, emptying an account James had set aside for charity donations. Detective Torres would later trace the money's path through 5 different drop locations, each one leading closer to the tragedy that was about to unfold. She was desperate, Torres would testify, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. The final night, August 28th, played out like a Greek tragedy. Security footage shows Sarah pacing her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. Her last conversation with Kevin, captured by the pool house security system, revealed 2 people who had lost all touch with reality. Sarah's plan was simple in its desperation. They would run away together, start fresh somewhere no one knew them. She had money, connections, dreams of a new life. But Kevin's response shattered more than just their fantasy. I'm 17, he said, his voice barely a whisper on the recording. When Sarah protested that age was just a number, his reply would later echo through the courtroom. No, it's evidence. The silence that followed lasted exactly 42 seconds. In less than 24 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other's life would be destroyed forever. But in that moment, in the quiet of a Memphis night, 2 people faced the reality of what they'd become, and what it would cost them both. The tension in Magnolia Heights reached its breaking point in the final days of August 2018. As Lisa Anderson's email to the school board circulated through administrative offices, the carefully maintained privacy of Memphis's elite suburb began to crumble. That email changed everything, Principal Margaret Rhodes would later testify. When a parent explicitly accuses a neighbor of exploiting their child, we can't look the other way, no matter who's involved. The police tip line, which had been quiet for months, suddenly lit up with anonymous calls. Detective Torres's log from August 29th reveals the community's growing panic. 10:15 a.m. Caller reports suspicious meetings in Mitchell Pool House. 11:30 a.m. Anonymous tip about expensive gifts to a minor. 2:45 p.m. Local business owner reports concerning behavior behind Methodist Church. 4:20 p.m. School staff member expresses concerns about student welfare. But it was the video that arrived in Sarah's inbox on August 30th that sent everything spiraling toward its tragic conclusion. Security footage from her own pool house, somehow accessed and copied, showing intimate moments that left no room for denial. The blackmailer knew exactly what they were doing, Detective Torres would later explain. They didn't just threaten to expose the relationship. They proved they could destroy both lives with a single mouse click. The demand was simple: $200,000 by midnight, or the video would be sent to every phone in Magnolia Heights. Sarah's response, captured by her home security system, showed a woman unraveling. She spent 3 hours pacing her kitchen, making frantic calls to her bank, her lawyer, and finally, fatefully, to Kevin. At Memphis East High School, the whispers had become a roar. Kevin's sudden removal from the swim team sparked speculation that reached far beyond the pool deck. Coach Thompson found himself fielding calls from college recruiters, trying to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell Texas that your star swimmer isn't just slipping? He's drowning in something you can't even discuss. Thompson would later ask the grand jury. Lisa Anderson's worst fears were confirmed when she received an anonymous envelope at the hospital where she worked. Inside were photos of her son leaving expensive restaurants with Sarah, receipts for jewelry, hotel charges from neighboring towns. The final item was a handwritten note. Do you know where your son really is when you're working nights? The confrontation that followed shook the Anderson household to its foundation. Lisa, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift, waited up until Kevin came home at 2 a.m. I didn't even recognize him anymore, Lisa would sob during her testimony. When I showed him the photos, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "You don't understand our love." By September 1st, the school administration had no choice but to take official action. An emergency meeting was called, attended by the principal, school counselors, and district administrators. The decision was made to contact the authorities. Sarah's desperation reached new heights when she learned of the school's involvement. Security cameras captured her attempting to enter Memphis East High School at 7:15 a.m., presumably to intercept Kevin before classes. The school's resource officer, recognizing her from swim meets, escorted her off the property. The community's reaction was swift and merciless. The same social circles that had embraced Sarah after James's death now turned their backs. Her tennis club membership was quietly revoked. The Garden Club chose a new location for their weekly meetings. Her name vanished from charity committee lists. Barbara Watson's final journal entry dated September 2nd captured the neighborhood's growing fear. Watched Sarah packing boxes into her car at 3 a.m. The boy was there, helping her. Something's about to break. God help us all when it does. The police, now actively monitoring the situation, noted increased activity at the Mitchell house. Large withdrawals from multiple banks. Travel websites searched on her computer. 2 new burner phones purchased at different locations. Detective Torres, reviewing the evidence later, would identify September 3rd as the point of no return. We found a half-written letter in Sarah's study, he would testify. It started as an apology to her dead husband and ended as a goodbye note to Kevin. That's when we knew we were racing against time. The final 24 hours saw a flurry of activity. Sarah liquidated one of her larger investment accounts. Kevin skipped school entirely, his absence noted but not reported given the ongoing investigation. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Sarah's Mercedes at the Memphis International Airport, then later at a small private airfield outside the city. The last person to speak to them both was, ironically, Lisa Anderson. Her call to Detective Torres at 11:42 p.m. on September 3rd would be the catalyst for everything that followed. My son just came home to pack a bag. He said he's leaving with her. Said they have it all planned out. Please stop them before it's too late. As midnight approached on September 3rd, 2018, the temperature in Memphis still hung at 85 degrees. Security cameras caught final images of Sarah Mitchell entering her pool house at 11:58 p.m. Kevin Anderson's car was seen turning onto Maple Drive at 12:03 a.m. What happened in the next 4 to 5 minutes would leave one person dead, another facing life in prison, and a community forever changed by the consequences of secrets too dangerous to keep. September 4th, 2018, 12:03 a.m. The security cameras at 1242 Maple Drive captured Kevin Anderson's silver Honda Civic turning into Sarah Mitchell's driveway, headlights off. The temperature still lingered at 85 degrees, the Memphis air thick with late summer humidity and approaching tragedy. The timestamp on that footage haunts me, Detective Torres would later confess. If we'd been 5 minutes faster, maybe things would have ended differently. Sarah Mitchell waited in the pool house, surrounded by hastily packed bags and stacks of cash withdrawn from 3 different banks. The security footage shows her pacing, checking her phone, jumping at every sound. On the antique desk that James had restored lay 2 one-way tickets to Cancun, departing at 6:15 a.m., purchased under false names. 12:07 a.m., Kevin enters the pool house. The exterior camera captures his expression. Not the love-struck teenager of previous months, but something harder, colder. He carried a backpack that police would later find contained his passport and Sarah's love letters. You could feel the tension through the surveillance video, Torres noted. The way they moved around each other. This wasn't a meeting of lovers. This was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The pool house security system recorded their final confrontation in chilling detail. Sarah, clutching airline tickets, laying out their escape plan. Kevin, standing by the door, his swimmer's frame rigid with newfound resolve. "I can't do this anymore." His words would later be transcribed for the jury. "My mom knows everything. The school's involved. This has to end." Sarah's response, as described by the forensics team analyzing the audio, shifted from pleading to rage. The woman who had once hosted Magnolia Heights' most elegant dinner parties was now screaming, her words echoing off the pool house walls. 12:23 a.m., the first signs of violence. A splash as something, later identified as a crystal vase, shattered against the wall. Sarah's voice, hysterical now. "You promised me. You said you loved me." The security footage shows Kevin turning to leave. Sarah grabbing his arm, her manicured nails leaving marks that would later be photographed by crime scene investigators. The struggle that followed lasted exactly 97 seconds. The physical evidence tells the story. Medical examiner Dr. Patricia Chen would testify. The victim fell backward, striking their head on the corner of the antique desk. The angle of impact, combined with the force, death would have been almost instantaneous. 12:27 a.m., the pool house falls silent. The exterior camera captures Kevin stumbling out, his white tennis shirt stained red. He stands there for 42 seconds, staring at his hands in the moonlight, before walking to his car with mechanical precision. Lisa Anderson's call to 911, recorded at 12:45 a.m., captures a mother's worst nightmare. "My son just came home. There's blood. Oh God, there's so much blood. He's not making sense. Please hurry." The first responders arrived at 1242 Maple Drive at 12:52 a.m. Officer James Rodriguez was first on scene. The pool house lights were still on, door wide open. You could smell the copper tang of blood from the driveway. Inside, they found Sarah Mitchell sprawled across the antique desk, her emerald green dress now stained a darker shade. The escape plan scattered around her, airline tickets, stacks of cash, a half-written letter to Kevin that would never be finished. The scene told a story of desperation. Crime scene investigator Maria Sanchez would report. Broken glass everywhere, overturned furniture, a struggle between 2 people who had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. By 1:15 a.m., Maple Drive was awash in red and blue lights. Neighbors in silk pajamas and hastily tied robes gathered behind police tape, watching as crime scene technicians moved in and out of the pool house. Barbara Watson, ever vigilant, recorded it all in her journal. The boy sat in the back of a police car, staring at nothing. His mother collapsed on the lawn when they brought out the body bag. Sarah Mitchell, who always insisted on perfection, was wheeled away under a sheet stained with her own blood. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. By sunrise, news vans lined Maple Drive. Reporters broadcast live from manicured lawns, telling the world how a widow's obsession and a teenager's confusion had ended in death. Memphis East High School canceled classes for the day. The swim team gathered in their locker room, Kevin's empty locker a silent reminder of how quickly dreams can turn to nightmares. "We found his letter of intent to Texas still in his locker," Coach Thompson would later say, his voice breaking. Everything he'd worked for, everything his mother had sacrificed for, gone in one night of madness. Detective Torres, walking through the pool house at dawn, found the final piece of the puzzle. Sarah's phone, cracked but still functioning. Her last unsent text message to Kevin read, "If I can't have you, no one will." By noon on September 4th, Kevin Anderson was formally charged with manslaughter. Lisa Anderson mortgaged her home for his bail. And in the perfectly maintained gardens of Magnolia Heights, neighbors who had watched this tragedy unfold whispered about how they had seen it coming but done nothing to stop it. The most tragic part, Detective Torres would later write in his final report, wasn't just the death of Sarah Mitchell. It was watching how a combination of loneliness, obsession, and secrets could destroy not just two lives, but an entire community's sense of safety and trust. The Memphis Police Department's investigation into Sarah Mitchell's death began in the pre-dawn hours of September 4, 2018. Detective Michael Torres, a veteran of Memphis homicide, arrived at 1242 Maple Drive at 2:15 a.m. to find a scene that would challenge even his experienced eye. The pool house told multiple stories, Torres would later write in his official report. A planned escape, evidenced by packed bags and airline tickets. A violent confrontation, marked by broken glass and blood spatter. And beneath it all, a tragedy months in the making. Crime Scene Unit Chief Maria Sanchez spent 72 hours processing the scene. Her team collected over 200 pieces of evidence, including Sarah's cracked iPhone, blood-stained love letters, and security camera hard drives that would prove crucial to the prosecution's case. The blood spatter analysis was definitive, Sanchez testified. The victim fell backward, striking the corner of the desk with significant force. The angle and impact patterns suggested a push rather than an intentional strike. Digital forensics proved particularly revealing. Despite their attempts at secrecy, Sarah and Kevin had left an extensive electronic trail. The cybercrimes unit recovered 2,847 text messages between their burner phones, 126 hours of security footage from the pool house, $243,000 in bank transfers, multiple flight searches to non-extradition countries. The timeline reconstruction placed Kevin at the scene for exactly 23 minutes. Every moment was captured on camera, Torres noted. From his arrival at 12:03 a.m. to his departure at 12:26 a.m., we could account for every second. Witness interviews painted a picture of escalating obsession. Barbara Watson provided months of detailed journal entries. The school counselor shared records of Kevin's declining academic performance. Even the local Cartier boutique manager testified about Sarah's unusual purchases for a younger relative. Kevin Anderson's arrest on September 7, 2018, made national headlines. The charges: manslaughter in the second degree. The perp walk from police headquarters to the courthouse became iconic. A 17-year-old swimming champion in handcuffs, his future drowning in the consequences of a fatal attraction. The state recognizes the complexity of this case, District Attorney Eleanor Martinez announced. We have a deceased woman who exploited a minor, but also a young man who took a life. Justice must balance both truths. The defense strategy, led by prominent attorney James Sullivan, focused on Sarah's manipulation of a minor. This wasn't murder, Sullivan argued in his opening statement. This was the tragic end to a pattern of adult exploitation. My client was as much a victim as the deceased. The prosecution, however, had the security footage. Frame by frame, they showed the jury the final confrontation. Sarah's attempts to prevent Kevin's departure. The struggle. The fatal push. Expert testimony became crucial. Dr. Patricia Chen, the medical examiner, confirmed the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the occipital region, consistent with impact against the desk corner. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Psychologist Dr. Robert Nash testified about grooming behaviors and trauma responses. The defendant exhibited classic signs of manipulation by an authority figure. The gifts, the secrets, the isolation from family, these are textbook patterns. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Lisa Anderson attended every day, watching her son from the gallery as his swimming achievements were reframed as evidence of his strength. Strength that made the fatal push more damning in the prosecution's narrative. Barbara Watson's testimony proved particularly compelling. Reading from her journal, she reconstructed months of observations. July 15th, saw Kevin leaving Sarah's at 3 a.m. July 22nd, Sarah buying him expensive gifts at the mall. August 1st, obvious intimate moment by the pool. I watched this disaster unfold like a Greek tragedy. The school counselor's records painted a picture of systematic decline. Dropping grades, missed practices, withdrawn behavior. It was like watching someone slowly drown. She testified, and being unable to throw a lifeline. The verdict came down on October 23, 2018. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kevin Anderson guilty of manslaughter in the second degree, but with a recommendation for leniency given the circumstances. Judge Harold Matthews, known for his strict sentences, surprised the courtroom with his ruling. The court cannot ignore the unique circumstances of this case. The defendant, while legally responsible for Sarah Mitchell's death, was himself a victim of exploitation. I sentence Kevin Anderson to 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3. The sentence acknowledged both the loss of life and the manipulation that led to it. As one juror later told the Memphis Commercial Appeal, there were no winners here, just different degrees of tragedy. Kevin Anderson was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his swimming scholarships replaced by a prison number. Lisa Anderson collapsed in the gallery, her son's future now measured in parole hearings rather than Olympic trials. The legal system worked, Detective Torres would later reflect, but did justice really prevail? A woman is dead, a young man's life is derailed, and a community is left wondering how they missed the signs until it was too late. The ripple effects of Sarah Mitchell's death and Kevin Anderson's conviction spread through Memphis like poison in still water. Lisa Anderson, once respected as a dedicated single mother and ER nurse, took a leave of absence from Methodist Hospital. The whispers followed her even in the antiseptic halls where she had worked for 15 years. I lost everything, Lisa would tell Dateline NBC in their special Death in a Perfect Suburb. My son, my home, my community. Even my patients looked at me differently, wondering how I didn't see what was happening under my own roof. The Anderson home, mortgaged to pay for Kevin's legal defense, sold at a loss. Lisa moved into a small apartment across town, closer to the state prison where her son now lived in a 6-by-8 cell. Magnolia Heights, once Memphis's most coveted address, saw property values plummet. Real estate agent Caroline Parker noted the impact. Houses that listed at $1.2 million dropped to $800,000 overnight. Nobody wanted to live where that happened. Every pool house became a reminder. Memphis East High School struggled with the aftermath. The swim team, once state champions, couldn't shake the shadow of their former captain's fall. Coach Thompson resigned at the end of the semester, telling the school board, "Some stains don't wash out of the water." The media coverage was relentless. National news vans camped on Maple Drive for weeks. Cougar killer or victim screamed tabloid headlines. True crime podcasts dissected every detail, turning neighbors' testimonies into downloadable entertainment. Barbara Watson, whose detailed journals had helped convict Kevin, found her own role in the tragedy haunting her retirement. I watched it happen, wrote it all down, but I never spoke up until it was too late. Support groups emerged from the wreckage. Mothers Against Predatory Relations, MAPR, formed in Sarah's own church basement, ironically led by Lisa Anderson. If we can save one child, prevent one family's destruction, she told supporters, then maybe some good can come from this nightmare. September 2023 found Magnolia Heights changed beyond recognition. The Mitchell house, unsold for years, was finally demolished. In its place, the community built a meditation garden, though locals noted how few people actually used it. Kevin Anderson, released after 3 years for good behavior, moved to Seattle where his aunt lived. Too many ghosts in Memphis, his mother explained to former neighbors. He never swam competitively again. The case sparked legislative change. The Mitchell-Anderson Act passed in Tennessee, requiring schools to provide comprehensive training on recognizing and reporting inappropriate student-adult relationships. Memphis East High School instituted the most rigorous supervision protocols in the state. Security cameras, once focused on external threats, now monitored every interaction between students and adults. The swimming program never fully recovered. The prevention program, See Something, Save Someone, became mandatory in all Memphis schools. Barbara Watson, seeking redemption, became its most passionate speaker. "We all think it can't happen in our neighborhood," she would tell parents. "That's exactly why it does." Lisa Anderson's support group expanded nationwide, with chapters in 30 states. She dedicated her life to educating parents about the subtle signs she had missed. Her speaking engagements at nursing conferences focused on helping healthcare workers recognize exploitation patterns. The trauma lingered in unexpected ways. Property records showed that every home with a pool house in Magnolia Heights either removed it or converted it to open-air cabanas. The neighborhood pool, once a social hub, stood eerily empty most summers. Detective Torres, who retired in 2022, kept the case file on his desk until his last day. "Some cases change you," he reflected in his retirement interview. This one changed a whole community's innocence. Perhaps most telling was the memorial plaque in the meditation garden. After heated community debate, it read simply, "For those we failed to protect. May we learn. May we watch. May we speak." The Memphis Commercial Appeals 5-year retrospective noted how the case had become a cautionary tale taught in criminal justice classes across the country. The Mitchell Anderson tragedy, the article concluded, reminds us that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the shadows, but in plain sight, behind perfect lawns and pristine facades. Lisa Anderson's final public statement, made on the 5th anniversary of Sarah's death, perhaps best captured the lasting impact. "We all thought we were living in a perfect neighborhood, where things like this couldn't happen." That illusion of perfection was exactly what allowed this tragedy to unfold. The cameras caught everything except what mattered: our failure to protect our children, even from those who claimed to love them. Magnolia Heights never regained its status as Memphis's premier suburb. But perhaps that was fitting, a reminder that no amount of wealth or prestige can protect a community that chooses to look away until it's too late.